Greg Young. But most importantly, Ashley needs to introduce herself. Hey, okay, George.
Hey, George.
Here, you can sit here.
Oh,
George. Ashley, introduce yourself.
My name is Ashley. Oh, thank you. Ashley Chang Gonzalez. So I'm here to step in while Lacey is out. She went out last week. So bear with me. It was sooner than she anticipated. So I will be asking you guys lots of questions throughout her absence.
Have you been with the county for a while, or?
Yeah, I work with environmental health, but not
Okay.
with water resources. So this is like a
What do you do there?
new language. I'm in the land and water program. So I do
Like well permitting and dairy
yeah.
stuff?
Mostly online on-site septics
Okay.
and the land use portion of our review. Yeah.
Most of us have all dealt with those issues as well.
So Ashley is helping manage through all this effort. So some of these questions that might come up in our own conversation here are because we don't have Lacey's expertise to help us for a moment. So let's go around for her benefit, especially let's go around and do little introductions. George, your talk.
So George Park, Lone Tree Mutual Water Company.
Brad Samuelson, I think I'm a consultant and I manage several little water districts and mutual water companies in the sub-basin. I think I'm representing Standing Mesh Mutual Water Company on this technical committee.
Okay.
Yeah, as a official TAC.
As my seat, yeah.
Right. And you're official TAC member also, right? You're not here as well.
I think so.
This is
I
where
had
I'm
a
like,
hard time remembering.
It's been a lot of years. He's also an alternate on the board.
right,
Okay.
Jimmy Atwell, farmer in the Merced and Madera area.
okay.
Bob Kelly, Stevenson Water District, member of the TAC board.
Clayton Urbino, farmer in Stevenson, member of the TAC committee.
Morgan Harmon on Clayton Water District and a farmer out on the, I guess, southwest corner of Merced County. And I'm on the TAC board too.
Scott Menifee, Clayton Water District, Menifee River Ranch, and I'm not on this board.
Okay.
Lou?
Lou Myers, grower in Eastern Merced.
And you're on the TAC.
I also think so.
It's on my calendar.
There's a couple of chats. Is there something we?
It was Danielle. She said that she's able to get on
Okay.
and she just doesn't have a mic or
Okay,
video.
so Danielle is listening to take some notes. Maybe Danielle, you could do this through chat. I don't know if we have a quorum because I'm not really sure what our total numbers are on the TAC and to know
looks
if we have
good.
enough people.
I think it looks good.
I know we're missing
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
Six. And Lou, I don't know how we handle
He
Lou as
we
an
probably
app.
can't count him.
Yeah, because you're absent, Lou.
I am absent. I cannot count.
You're here as a member of the public. So if we had 6, does that make us, is that a quorum? I just don't know.
I
how
don't
those
know
numbers
if
work.
is it 13, as long as we're not.
Danielle. I have no video or audio, but I can listen. So Danielle, is 6? Yes, Lou does not count. Is 6 get us a?
This is like magic 8 balls.
Is that Lou's wife who answered?
She might have the same answer. Let's just recognize that. So I'm still not sure. Yes, I do believe we have.
In a while.
Yeah, it's the first time in a while, for sure.
I want to say years.
So then following our agenda, a couple things to first public comment period. Is there any comments from anybody for any item that's not otherwise on the agenda?
Would it be a good time to represent some thoughts that I'm hearing from local growers?
I would rather you bring that as a TAC board member for the, if it's about allocation stuff or any of the framework or any of that, I'd rather have that come up as a discussion that you're hearing. Because part of your TAC
Yeah,
position is to represent others
right.
and bring that feedback. So I'd rather see that. So it'd be more of any topics that are not otherwise on the agenda.
Well, some of the topics aren't just like, I could keep it to things that aren't on the agenda. So
Okay.
I've heard a couple of people are pushing back saying that, how are we supposed to come into compliance with sustainability without any increase in surface water. And so there's been requests for the GSA to push back against DWR for an increase in surface water. You know, that doesn't really pertain to the groundwater, but that's one thing that I'm hearing.
Those efforts to date have been successful, right? Anybody? Sites is almost gonna happen.
That's not gonna help the Merced subbasin though.
Looking for the TAC,
Or
Technical.
custodial, janitorial.
not this one, so, sorry,
Okay.
yeah. All right, any other public comments?
I mean, on that note, I would just say that in the Merced subbasin, the most critical item related to water.
Alvin and all the rest of them up above.
Up above. For water.
Well, Jeannie's joined us.
It's related to the Merced River and the voluntary agreements.
Yeah,
That's critical to our subbasin.
the requirements for more water as outflow from the surface impoundments in this basin have an adverse effect on groundwater and sustainability. So that's the challenge.
Like 1-to-1. For Stevenson water dish, all the water right holders, everybody.
Any other public comments for items not on the agenda? You said you could boil it down, you had a couple, but you only mentioned one.
That's the big one.
Meeting minutes, we did not have any meeting minutes available from our last meeting that we were able to find, because part of the challenge is finding access to all the folders and everything. So there may be something that comes forward for a future TAC, but I don't think there was anything tangible that would be of concern. So there's nothing to adopt. Because we have a quorum, I want you guys to be thinking about somebody potentially bringing a message on behalf of TAC to the board meeting on April 11th, which is the next GSA board meeting. So we will have TAC, a report from TAC. So Ashley, make sure we have this on the agenda, a report from TAC on that, the meeting, because we haven't had a report from TAC for a while, so it may not even be an item. So somebody can be appointed as that spokesperson, and whatever topics or whatever recommendations you want to make as kind of a group. That could be a summation of comments, that could be one coalesced idea or concept, or a representation of a series of comments or something. So what we want to do, you can see on the agenda several additional items. So first, the question would be, does anybody have anything not on the agenda they would like to see added to the agenda? All right, so we have a presentation, a walkthrough that will allow us to go through all these pieces that are on here. So instead of necessarily taking them one by one, if we run through the presentation materials and use that, and we can always back up through them. We can pause on them anytime. We can have a conversation and make sure we get through these items of the allocation framework, the sustainability zones, the preliminary allocation values, the groundwater accounting framework, platform. And then, as I noted before everybody was in here, we have the potential for, let's say, our next meeting of should be scheduled. What do we originally did these as a third. Where are we?
I think it's
Fourth Tuesday?
Fourth Tuesday every other month.
Fourth Tuesday every other month. So there's probably one scheduled for May right now, but that also would coincide with like coming up.
There's, I know that Lacey said that she wanted the TAC to decide on the May meeting because there was some sort of conflict, but I didn't
Yeah.
know what it was for.
Well, I think it runs up against Memorial Day weekend type of thing too.
Oh, okay.
Possibly. But I'm not sure, but nonetheless, we can also, as a group, you can choose to have some additional meetings, some meetings in between, we can get scheduled. So when we get to that point, we can schedule some additional meetings if you want to have time to be able to go out and get more input, gather more thoughts, bring it back, be able to make some additional recommendations to the board. So are you able to go find that?
Yeah, I have it. Oh, Danielle just said something.
I saw it there for a second.
You decided to meet in May or just have a meeting in June or July.
And I think we can also have a meeting in April and June. We can have April, May, June, and July if we want. The intent is to adopt, we'll get to this in a minute, but adopt a framework and a set of rules which include the allocation in July. And the reason for all that timing is the GSP, the updated GSP is being drafted right now and is due to DWR by January 30th, 2025, which means the GSA board is going to be adopting it in December sometime, which probably means they're going to hear it and talk about it as a draft in November, which also you start backing up for that and that outreach. We need to essentially have things drafted in the GSP by July, August, September timeframe, which in order to make sure this allocation framework is reflected in that, because it'll show well at DWR that we are taking action, we want to have that nailed down and adopted so we can represent it appropriately in the GSP. So that's how all that timing comes back to July. So let's just jump into this. So we're going to do several kind of workshops, discussions today, tomorrow out at Marqueen. Is it Marqueen or Marqueen? I always
Yeah, it's been both ways, and I don't
Okay.
think there is a defined.
apricot is
It's
just
San Joaquin, but
Everyone
it's
typically
been
calls it,
Merquin, Merqueen,
okay.
both words.
it doesn't matter.
And then a workshop that's scheduled on April 3rd. That's going to be in the evening out at the Farm Bureau, 6 p.m. Advertisements. I think some email blast just went out about that maybe today or yesterday.
Today.
I think it was today I got one.
Okay, and there's, I think some postcards might get, no, just the email blast. That was all we're doing.
Yeah, the email
Sorry.
blast and it's posted on our website.
Awesome.
I have one remedial question, sorry to jump in, that I know we've addressed before, but I'm hoping that either Greg or Brad could remind me and maybe others. As we get into the literature, it references often the 2015 groundwater level, which I know is going to kind of be the equilibrium we're solving to. How is the DWR and subsequently the Merced Subbasin GSA going to be solving to that 2015 water level in the areas with the data gaps where we don't have a good baseline?
Well, it's a good question. If we don't know what it was in 2015, it's hard to say how we improve that. So those data gaps, I know Woodard and Kern has worked on a data gaps plan for the GSP, and those things are being implemented. There's also a significant amount of data, level data. Larkin, I know, has provided some. George provided a bunch. There were some from out in LeGrand. They got submitted. I have an outstanding call right now with Woodard and Kern about how that data is being incorporated, because there's well data out there. It's just that they didn't.
None of that's in Lou's areas though. That's what he's about.
So Lou is the big data gap. Is that what we're finding?
That whole area, I think of the east side is.
Oh, no, the county's been sounding some of our wells. So somebody's coming out and checking them for a few years, I think. It's been a few years, but I know certainly in the last year or two.
But not back to 2015.
The challenge is a couple of things. Yeah, there's limited data. Then there's a set of wells that are being monitored officially that met some standard that Woodard and Kern uses. A subset of those are the representative wells being used for reporting to the state, which are triggering. And those are the ones we really care about for 2015 levels. At the end of the day, is those representative wells. And we may add more representative wells in some of those data gap areas. And I don't recall exactly how they were going to go back and recreate that groundwater level, but I think they had a plan. Woodard and Kern had an approach. I don't know why I keep staring at the screen. You can't even see me, Lou. So I'm staring at your face on the screen for no reason. So I don't know the full answer to that.
How do you plan on handling the added well data that, they weren't crazy about because there was water near the well? And
So
things like
that's
that?
the question I'm having with Jim Blanky at Woodard and Kern is what are we doing about that? Eric has called me and has been asking how and if that data is getting involved, included and in what manners. So we're trying to work through that. I know there's there's data that's useful,
Right.
and exactly how it gets plugged in or not included, we need to kind of continue to work through that.
You said that people start getting involved when the allocations come out. So now you're gonna have allocations, come out, people are gonna get involved. Is there a way to try and communicate with the public that, yes, give us your data because we will not do bad things to you for giving us data? I think that would be a good thing to have going as well. Have something preemptive ready. Yeah, if you want to give us data, give it to us. This is what we need, and have a form pre-filled out, ready to go.
I agree, and I think there's conversations about that. I know EKI was doing some analysis and trying to get some more well sites located. It's a great point, and that we need to make sure we can collect data and collect useful data.
Right.
Matt Beeman's working on it a lot too.
Yeah,
Matt and EKI. And Woodward. And
But is
They-
Matt just working in Magusa, or is he also working on the?
He's working outside too.
yeah, it was a grant from DWR
That's right,
that
that's why,
Magusa is the lead of that grant, but then they were running into staffing issues, so we're having EKI help.
Yeah.
So, but they're at the same time, Magusa wants to focus on their space.
Well, it's only a little bit of money. It's gonna put in like 1 or 2 wells.
Yeah, it's not
So
a lot, but the broader question about data from other people's wells and what are the protocols? When, when do we have opportunities to get data? The new well, like this GSA's well consistency document says, if you're gonna abandon a well, are you willing to make it available as a monitoring well instead of just completely destroy it? So there have been a few that I think we're saying that they may, that pathway exists. But there are protocol issues because, you don't want to tell a guy, hey, you got to keep it shut off for 48 hours, make sure we have recovery on your cone of depression. And they're like, it's middle of July or whatever, I'm not shutting off. Kidding me? So those are challenges we have to continue to work through to make sure it's useful data
Mhm.
and not misrepresentative.
I think if you probably explain to people how short-sighted that thinking is, that you're not willing to shut it off for 2 days and then get measured at maybe 15, 20, 50 feet lower, and then that's what we're all gonna have to go by. I think that people would maybe understand, because I don't think the general person probably understands the cone of depression and those kinds of things. So like if it's really explained to people by shutting the well off, it's only gonna benefit you, then I think they'd be more willing to do it.
That's a good point. I think the broader point of that is there's that Lou ran us down this whole thread here, that we have some sort of better outreach and understanding and be proactive on being able to collect more data
Right.
on well levels.
I'm all for saving money, but I would say in the long run, if it's long-term monitoring, we're better off to have dedicated
I agree.
wells. I like using abandoned wells because there's so many of them out there that you can convert to dedicated monitoring wells. Just having consultants out when they do their rounds of well levels and farmers are using their wells, it's just long-term, it sucks for access.
I mean,
Advantage.
transducer.
Some people can manage fine,
Yeah.
but just when you have a program set up, it's best to have dedicated wells, especially when it's official data.
I think a possible problem with that though is your new well next to your old well, and then you didn't shut off your new well, and then they're over there,
It's all
in the
proximity.
cone,
right?
Yeah.
you know, and so then your well's not being shut off. Nobody's even thinking about having it be shut off, and then it's being read at a lower level than maybe it could be. So
Yeah.
proximity would definitely have to play a role in that.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Just because you abandon a well doesn't mean we'll take it automatically and equip it.
Right.
And do something
Yeah.
because it might be 100 yards from your other well.
Right.
And it's in its cone of depression.
Or
So-
wherever the next pole to the PG&E is usually is within that distance.
Typically it's 50 feet.
Right.
That's kind of requirements.
Yeah.
So,
The other thing too, though, I think that, if you guys figure out, like maybe one of the initial things that needs to be figured out is how you're gonna handle our data, then you can explain to people how you're gonna use the data, because I was apprehensive about sending ours in because God only knows what you're gonna do with it. And, I think all of us instinctively feel like it's gonna get used against us somehow, even though there's nothing really wrong with it. And so that all needs to be kind of factored in to get more trust and more public outreach, I think. Otherwise, I mean, it took 2 years for me. It took 2 years for me to warm up to the idea to do it, right? Okay, so, I mean, we're a little slow on the uptake, but, I see the value in it, but then I turned it in and then EKI says, sorry, there's no value here, even though it completely switches where we're at in the sub-basin and goes from way overdraft to being sustainable. So now that I've submitted my data, it doesn't really count and they're still going by the data that they think is better. So, there's a little bit of a hurdle there too, because sometimes I think that maybe us people on the ground don't get enough credit for knowing what's going on in our place, and just the numbers are dictating things. And I realize that, the scientific data has to be there and be backed up, but it's not a lab experiment. It's like all of our lives. And if it's really out there in the well, then it needs to be recognized that it's really out there in the well, whether there's water next to the well or not. You see what I'm saying?
No, I totally understand.
So I think that that's kind of like a big factor when it comes to the public.
That's a big hurdle to overcome. And I have the data to back it up, but they don't know what goes on my place. It's obvious they don't. Just from the allocation that came out.
Yeah, well, let's talk more about all of those pieces. I think that there's a lot of learning to go on. You guys know what's going on in your property very well. There's different situations across the basin. We'll recognize that. There's different situations of movement of water and where it's sourcing and where it's flowing from and where it may be intercepted by, and all those kind of challenges that we don't have answers. Right now we have the state. You guys are seeing what the state's doing to Larry and the conversations down in Kern. They're in front of the state board and they're imposing these big fees that are at least reducing the per acre foot charge from 40 to 20. Right, that's the current rule that's being talked about. We do not want the state to come in. So a lot of what we're talking about here is kind of starting for the next 5 years. And these allocations that we're talking about, or which we'll look at here, is a 5-year bucket that's going to give you room, one, for growers to manage within, and two, for us all to collect more data and get better understanding. And then it makes sense to start having more variations across our basin as to what's happening. What we don't want to end up with is an allocation that each grower's parcel has a different number than the next grower's parcel, because that is not, that starts to run, well, I don't want to say that. Let me back up and say, if we go that path, it's equivalent to going down an adjudication, where everybody is an owner and a signatory to an adjudication and has a quantity of water. And that may be where things go. That's what's happened in adjudicated basins. They spend 10 or 15 years saying, you get X, you get Y, you get Z.
No.
And those are battles and fought that are, a lot of people have spent a lot of money. So in the meantime, we're trying to find those solutions to keep the state away, reasonably start to manage reduced consumption of groundwater, and help us collect more data so that if we start to nuance it better, we can do that with levels of fairness and equity. I don't want to say equity, equality. I was make sure I got to use the right word. I just picture that little meme image, right? What switch?
It's both kind of crap, because like nothing's equal across my field, let alone the sub-basin. You know what I mean? So I appreciate that, everybody wants to be fair, but like, I think we got to deal with what we actually have on the ground instead of trying to like smooth it over so everybody's getting the same stuff. Like, I don't want to go to any kind of more adjudications with the state board than necessary, but I think that there's a lot of pitfalls when you try and just frost everything over the same. It's like knocking people out that shouldn't necessarily be knocked out, and then not helping the people that maybe need more help.
I mean, this really is the only subbasin I know that has the zones with the APA type different additional water based off 2015 levels. I mean, I think your argument is more related to your zone and the fact that you have river influence, and it should be different just for both of you guys compared to
And then,
the general, and then the generalization that's going on.
right.
But you're more made up though. The Stevenson, McQueen area is more made up with and I don't know the numbers that closely, but with your APA and the fact that your groundwater levels are at 2015 levels for sure, like
Right.
the data supports it, everything I've seen, you'll keep that APA, the additional water, throughout Sigma.
Right.
Whereas for you guys in Clayton, where it's your zone is below 2015, let's just say you're call you guys the subsidence zone. Because you're kind of lumped in.
So that's the problem.
That's the problem.
With everyone else.
You're lumped in with the rest.
Right.
It's not because I think our sub-basin has done a good job at recognizing, it's the only sub-basin that's recognized the differences in groundwater in these zones.
We're like 40 feet above, like,
So you
what we were. in
guys on the river,
2015.
My wells have consistently been higher. than
that's
So-
the issue, and that's
so-
where you get into data.
But here's part of this is where the legal part's coming in. I get that. You're
The
well-
problem is you guys are gonna, I mean, not you guys, but.
Oh, I know, I'll take it.
You guys are gonna.
Put on your
ruin the
government
economy
hat.
of the state of Merced County. I mean, you're gonna single-handedly, when they vote for this, ruin the economy of Merced County.
The state knows it.
So,
They don't care.
You
So-
know,
They don't care.
So
why doesn't
nothing.
anybody go fight back against the state? I mean, why are we taking this like a bunch of sheep? Why don't all these counties go to the state and change this? I mean, this is just BS. We're all going along down this road.
That's what we were saying 5 years ago.
I know, but
Welcome
you
to
know,
the club.
it is.
Yeah.
so
It's too little
You
too
know,
late.
you're gonna ruin the economy in the county. Property taxes, I mean, the county's already broke, they can't fix the roads, I assume they're broke, probably just giving the money away somewhere else, but we got the worst roads in the state. And their property taxes are gonna go to hell.
yeah.
Somebody ought to be thinking about that.
No, you
You're
follow-
saying what I said on the very first tax bill.
So-
I mean,
You followed 30,000
you got it.
acres. That's
So-
what happens in Merced sub-basin.
So recognize.
The government owns the rest of the land in Merced County, so where are they gonna get their tax base?
Recognize a couple of things. This sucks. I totally understand. Depending on where you are, this is like real estate, location, right? If you're sitting in the middle of MID, as long as the state doesn't take a big chunk of their service water away through flow standards, they're sustainable. They have plenty of water, a little bit of groundwater, a bunch of surface water. If you're outside of those and you only, I'm gonna exclude you guys for a moment here and just say you're somewhere where you are only getting groundwater, you're a distance away. So you're getting lateral seepage coming from rivers, coming from the foothills and everything, right? So and rainfall percolating. And if you're using more than naturally was coming in, you are pulling from everybody else. Is that reasonable to presume as a hypothesis?
Depending.
That's the definition of overdraft.
Okay, depending on what, that's part of where we gotta try and make sure we're clear, and I'm separating you right by the river.
Right, well, depending on, on the underground hydrology.
How fast it replenishes, how much you're
Right,
using,
so-
you know,
Exactly, so-
are you a water hog and consciously doing it? Or are you trying to actually
So the
farm the amount of acres that is sustainable?
analysis was saying that when you really look at it, amount of rainfall that percolates and soaks below the root zone, and that all depends, it varies year to year, which is a long-term average, is a certain quantity.
Mhm.
And then there's water flowing off through bedrock and everything from the high Sierras. And there's some water that flows in from the streams that percolates deeper into the basins depending on where other hydraulic gradients are. There's just so much water. So and we'll talk about it here, and you guys have seen the number, 13 inches is kind of what that sustainable yield is. Now, whether it should really be 8 there and 16 over here, it's not really clear why it would be buried. If you're, be it not for your proximity to the foothills or your proximity away from the foothills, why would your number be different? Again, leaving the river influence aside for a moment. So this is the challenge the GSA is trying to deal with, is the state says, we got overdraft, definition of overdraft is we're pulling 30 inches, but we only have 13 available to us. So we're using more than we have available. Why? We can point to any number of reasons why that has happened over time. So, I mean, that ship sailed, the blame ship is not going to work. So it's like, okay, how do we adjust to that? If I'm in MID or possibly in Stevenson or Merkeen where I have a surface water source, Lone Tree, I have another water supply that's gonna help me manage and balance all that stuff. So man, if I don't, and the only thing I had was groundwater, should I be allowed to pump significantly more? Or less than my neighbor?
Most other western states regulate it.
So this is where
The
the challenge.
difference is they regulate it first in time, first in right,
Yeah, that's true.
and this got screwed up.
No,
Well,
that's true.
I'm gonna,
That's the big issue here.
okay, I get that point, but I'm gonna back up a little bit. Groundwater law is written different than surface water law in California. So surface water is a first in time, first in right. Generally speaking, but you still have to put it to beneficial use.
Right.
And all those other attributes, right? Groundwater law is written as correlative to all the parties in a basin, regardless of your proximity or your location in the basin. And it's akin to riparian, which is you can not use it and then you can use it, and then you can not use it and then you can use it, and no one can, based on time, can call you out for that. So groundwater is very similar, and riparian is correlative too. So everybody along the riparian stream all has to balance the amount of water. Just because I'm upstream and it hits me first doesn't mean I get to use it all to the detriment of my neighbor riparian downstream.
Depends what river you're on.
Yeah. Well, if it's an adjudicated basin, but I'm saying that's the way the riparian law works. Now, it doesn't mean it's enforced that way. It doesn't mean it's enforced that way, but that's the way the law is written. And the state board is hiring more people to be enforcement officers, which is always great, you know?
I don't know if I'm arguing your point over that as much as I'm arguing, like, why aren't we recognizing areas that have differences? So like us along the river, or these guys along the river.
They do.
They do, we're
But
not.
You
And so-
guys, it's a couple of you guys next to the river. I say a couple of you, I'm not sure exactly.
Well, we're lumped in with other people who don't have the water rights that McQuinn and Stevenson do, and that's why
But you have to walk,
So-
do they have the river influence on the groundwater?
not all of it.
So let me
There's
get
Parts
to
of our
that.
zone, there's parts of our zone that we have no authority over, we have nothing, that's, so I'm actually kind of proposing that when we've been coming here for years, and it was, we don't want more than 4 or 5 zones, but we're up to 8, and I'm going, well, I love it.
We could
Let's
be
go
up to
for,
72.
let's go for 9, because we can prove in our area that we are sustainable. As far as some of the other people next to us, I can't prove that for them. They don't have the data. It's just like the rest of the whole basin. And so it's like, we can prove us. I don't know how to prove our neighbors.
So I want to get back to something, because that plays into all this conversation, about
Right, right.
sustainability
where
zones and how we're looking at things. But I'm gonna go to the point you guys are saying now. I'll bring the river in. You're the farm against the river, and whether or not you are or not, let's just hypothetically, you're the farm against the river. I'm the farm that's one parcel in from the river. You're pulling, you're pumping, river numbers are great. I'm sitting over here going, my wells are dropping. Is it because of you? The water's not getting to me from its seepage source because you're over pumping it. I don't know, and so that's the way correlative works. So now where do you start to draw that line? How far do you go in? 5 miles in doesn't get the same amount as 3 miles in? Doesn't get the same amount as
Can I speak to that, at least in our area?
Sure.
Back in 2006, we dug 5 different sites of cited 3 different monitoring wells in different areas. 3 of the sites were along the San Joaquin River. 1 was along the Merced River, closer to the river.
Mhm.
Then we had another site that's in the center of Stevenson. With respect to the sites that were closer to the river, when the water came up in a flood, the monitoring well water came up.
Okay.
When the river went down, the monitoring level went down. The monitoring well that's more than 3 miles away from the river, it didn't fluctuate at the same level that the rivers did. There was a connectivity that can be shown there.
There was connectivity.
Yeah.
Right. And it didn't respond as quickly, obviously, because you have a lot of soil barrier in between, right?
Right, it's the distance is
Right.
It's more significant, yeah,
So-
away from the river.
So that therein lies part of the challenge that the GSA is trying to struggle with is, again, location, location, location. I'm gonna go over to George here, who negotiated it. I don't know if he negotiated it, but you have a seepage agreement with the Bureau, right? That essentially quantifies some additional water to you available because of the river's influence on top of the sustainable yield number. Now, there may be limits placed out there associated with corporate below, above subsidence. There might be other drivers. So we're trying to weigh all this. I mean, it's not, these things are, this is the reason why attorneys spend their whole careers on adjudications, right? And these things can take 20, 30 years in some of these basins where they've adjudicated. Santa Maria took, what, 15 plus years, I think, to adjudicate that basin. And it's still being brought under challenge in various court battles and various things. So
I think in our particular area, though, it's actually it's already ferreted itself out, like, on Road 4, back in the day, there used to be shallow wells, there isn't anymore since what, the 80s or whatever, so it's already where it is. And I don't think that there is any of that extra correlative, thing that you're talking about, because the bypass severs us.
right, because you guys are between the river and the bypass
Correct.
essentially, which mostly,
Exactly.
right, and so maybe, and I'm not advocating this whatsoever, but maybe down the road, there's value in recognizing something different there from a zone perspective. Just like your arguments
Have you
about
looked at
zone
the
9.
zone map?
I don't even
Yeah.
know that our
That's
shallow
really-
groundwater connects to
So
the shallow groundwater, say on Road 4, because the water quality issues are so different.
True.
That I don't even think our water connects.
They have to go to
here's
super-
the flip side argument. What if, and I know this is something this GSA has gotten this letter, and several of you have probably seen it from the Bureau a couple of years ago that said there's 30,000 acre feet of water coming out of the river that we think is ours along this basin's boundary. That's part of their settlement, their fish migration and San Joaquin River flow requirements.
Well,
right?
I've got a seepage easement.
So you have a seepage easement.
Yeah,
Okay,
with
so-
reclamation too, so I guess I've already negotiated that.
Yes, so
You
in
have
our
that.
groundwater platform,
That's in your,
you have an allocation of sustainable yield, an allocation of APA, and then you're gonna have a number that goes in that
yeah,
bucket also. I don't know if you have an agreement, but that counts as a separate and apart
that's your own water.
quantity of water that is yours.
Yeah.
Your neighbor across the street that doesn't have that agreement, doesn't have that. So this is, and I was gonna try and, similar to that, I was thinking about, are there ways to not flavor, but to recognize recharge or other things that can add to your bucket in ways that your other people that are not situated in the same spot, location, 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 don't have that opportunity. And thus, yeah, you got 13 and you got an APA that's sliding, but you got this other chunk of water that other people don't have. That puts you in a position to be farming different, kind of like the Stevenson Merkeen stuff, than what might be happening out on LeGrand. And that's where we're trying to put all these little pieces together to give that recognition of different chunks of water, separated apart from the native groundwater that's supposed to be correlatively shared. And then allow you seepage agreement. I didn't know that, Scott. That's good to know. You guys have a seepage agreement. That's a number that you're going to be able to say, here it is. And I get this much added credit into my buckets. That sets you apart, right? So I know we haven't really got, we're on
that could be different.
we're on the entry page still.
Well, yeah, that's what I was gonna say. I have a hard stop at 4.
These things are.
And we haven't really started yet.
But all this kind of plays into that consideration of where the GSA and the strategic ad hoc was developing some of these concepts and trying to come up with numbers that look at these principles of some flexibility, some fairness, trying to maintain some of the economics without knowing the state is sitting there forcing something down on you, and trying to have self-control on it rather than self-governance rather than having outside governance. But
So-
it is bottom line. Lou,
Yeah, Greg, and everyone else. I think that it's a little bit timely having this conversation. When I read the literature, my biggest criticism, I think, dovetails into what everyone is saying here, where when we first not that the TAC has any real authority or who knows what kind of passive authority we have. But the big criticism I had is when we spoke about the sustainability zones, we codified, at least in our recommendation, that the board would revisit the boundary of the zones every 5 years. And maybe to satisfy some of the other parties here at the table, they can also revisit whether additional or fewer sustainability zones would be required during those periods of time. So if it's warranted to carve out certain areas that don't, once the data is gathered. And I think before, when the TAC discussed this, everybody concluded, I'm not trying to put words in anybody's mouth, but everybody concluded that we have such limited data that we're not going to be able to dictate exactly where these sustainability zones should be. Everybody's kind of throwing darts with this map of 8, which I think is great because you have to have a starting point. But I was disappointed that in the literature Lacey provided, the sustainability zones weren't going to be revisited in a 5-year period. The borders of them.
Yeah, I don't think that's completely off the table, but I think at the same time that if we operate that they are quasi-fixed, but use the 5 years to update all sorts of other things, that might then in turn result in needing to change those boundaries. If that makes sense, because that, let's go to slide 1. Let's go to slide 1. That's the agenda. Let's go to slide 2. We don't have, you know what? We didn't, did I include that? The guiding principles, I didn't put that in as a slide, did I?
Well, it's at the end of the,
It's at the end of your packet.
End of the
There's the
packet,
guiding principles. That was where I was trying to get to. Oh yeah, we do have them. Okay. So this plays into exactly what you're saying, Lou, I think, and that is we had developed these and adopted them as the board back in 2022. Oh yeah, it says there. Yeah. October 22. To help guide some of these conversations on allocations and ultimately recharge. So strive for certainty. So the idea of having kind of, these are our zones, that kind of gets people knowing that there's going to be some sort of geographic differences. That also plays into recognized spatial disparity. There's variances that are happening. Now, does that mean those are locked forever? No, this is a board. The board can vote ultimately. I mean, TAC isn't a board, but the board of the GSA can make changes and adopt all these things. Support flexibility. We'll talk about some of that with farm unit concepts and other things. We want to be able to let people figure out as a business operator how to move forward in this changing condition. Allow for adaptability. So that is really where there may be adjustments. Those could include the zones. It may not have explicitly stated it. Again, I keep staring back at the TV like I'm talking to Lou. Lou, I am talking to you, but just staring at the middle of the room instead of the TV. I think that's where that part comes in, is that there is allowance for that adaptability. The promotion of equality. We want to recognize whether you're a big farmer, a small farmer, you're growing row crops or tomatoes, which are row crop, or you're growing trees or you're farming cows, whatever you're doing, we want you to all be kind of in this together and be able to have some fairness. So you don't say, hey, just because you've been growing, as an example, we had these discussions in other basins back a ways. I've been growing almonds, so I should get more than the guy who's been growing safflower. Well, that seems kind of odd. You know, maybe you're more the reason why there's been a problem. So there was a lot of conversation around that point that got them back to saying, okay, everybody gets the same allocation, because I may decide to grow almonds and you might decide to grow safflower, and we should have those choices. So everybody gets kind of treated equally. And then simplicity, I think, is really important here, especially on the front end, Brad, to your points. Yeah. We don't have data. We don't have enough data. And so the idea of kind of having some values that maybe don't have the reflected change right now, but will as we go forward, keeps things simple for now, so everybody starts to move in the right direction. And then the last one there, facilitate economic stability. We know there's always tons of pressures in farming, and this just adds a whole nother one, and that directly affects tax base, it affects services, it affects all sorts of stuff. And it's a huge challenge. It's a huge challenge whether you're in Bakersfield, Kern, or all the way up into Sac Valley somewhere. They're all dealing with this stuff. So there's no easy answers. But these guiding principles, I think if we keep those in mind when we're looking at what's being rolled out right now, and when you guys are talking to people and getting feedback, let's keep those in mind. You know, it's easy, everybody just kind of say, this is I'm gonna take my ball and go home. But we're potentially going to face more challenges at that point. As Larkin knows down in
For,
a lot of that.
So fun.
for one, I appreciate the guiding principles and I appreciate where this board has gone. I mean, to be honest, it's not fun for anybody, but at least we're going someplace. I will also echo that at this point, we have such limited data. I, for one, and I'll speak for myself, I'd be very concerned to define the sustainability zones. Right. I mean, they're obviously defined right now and that's done. But I would encourage for one person, the board to revisit them once they have some actual data that's more reliable. I'd be concerned about getting locked into this bucket. That might be inequitable.
It's fair.
Could I add one thing?
Yeah.
One of the frustrations that I have had going forward is I came off the board 4 years ago, and it was right when Prop 218 was developed and presented. We did not, I say we, our area did not understand exactly how it was going to be implemented, and we were shocked to find that the land repurposing work was going to apply to us, even though we could not participate. We were also shocked to find that the water licensing fee was going to be applied to us, even though we opted not to participate. My point of bringing those two up, so that's past history, but my point is Eric Swenson's leaving the board now. We're told that Lloyd has appointed Nick to serve on the committee, the ad hoc committee. We feel we're not going to be informed of what takes place in these committees, and that's where the decisions that are so important going forward are going to be made with respect to how a lot of things. There's a lot of meat that's not in this allocation policy. They're going to have to be developed, and I'm not going to go through all that. But there is a tremendous amount that it concerns us in that we're not going to be able to find out until it is presented to the full board, and then we have 30 or 60 days to fully answer, and we get 3 minutes to respond. We don't feel comfortable with being locked out of committee meetings. And I just wanted to say, it would be nice if this guiding principle recognized transparency.
Suggestion to maybe expand it to include transparency.
Yes.
For what it's worth, we recognize this reason spatial disparity is on there because we recognize that your area is different circumstances than others, and we're trying to find ways that all this works.
Yeah, I appreciate that. But there's,
But I get it.
as I said, there's a lot of meat that has yet to go on the bones here. And the board is going to have to make a lot of decisions in the implementation of sustainability.
Yep.
And they have far-reaching effects, and financial and physical.
Yes.
So the transparency is very important.
And they're, yeah, and again, I'll keep this theme. This sucks, right? This is going to change conditions for a lot of people more so than other people, and you know, not the best way. So it's like, you know.
Thank you.
All right, let's move
Do you
to
want me-
the.
Can we go back?
No, this is more for those other meetings where people may not have thought about Sigma for a while. So this is the updated map of sustainability. This is available on the website. In fact, there's an interactive one, which we'll see on the next slide, that's on the website that you can go to, find your parcel. You can type in an APN or you can zoom around and check. What you see a couple of differentiations in color, like here, you see a lighter and a darker. Anywhere you see a little bit darker shade in each one of those zones is the irrigated parcels. And I'm going to preface that with irrigated parcels as recognized, either recognized as from the parcel from the assessor's office or from DWR's crop layer. Now I don't recall which one because we go back, but neither are perfect. But that generally represents where the farmed irrigated land is compared to the non-irrigated. And that's going to be important when we talk about the framework about who gets the allocation. You know, you can see a lot of lighter color in 3 and a lot of lighter color in 1 and a lot of lighter color in 2. Those represent a lot of that grazing land that we didn't write the boundaries. DWR wrote the boundaries of this basin, and they included all of that up into that land and even into Mariposa County a hair. And that's all grazing land, but they're in, we got to address that, right? So when you see that, when you go out to 7, it's where a lot of that stuff is. Here you have the National Fish and Wildlife, some of the refuge out there. You know, so you can kind of.
Hey, Greg, I know some farmers have submitted requests for parcels to be moved one way or the other just to keep them in one zone. Do you know when those are going to be addressed by the board?
That is interesting, because we had understood, I think Ashley, you may have been in some of those conversations with Lacey, that we hadn't received any.
No, I've submitted them.
Okay, can you?
At least one, for sure.
Can you resubmit from your initial submission? Because there was
Forward it.
originally when it was done, there was like a date, we're giving a certain amount of time, and I think we're past all that. So I want to see when it was submitted to make sure we recognize that it was there and somehow
All right, I'll,
lost.
Betty, who works for me, did it and CC'd me on it. I'll just have her re-forward it and make sure you're included.
Yeah, can you CC me? Because I don't think I'll have access if it's submitted to like the MSGSA email.
Yeah.
I won't have
Yeah, I'll
access.
send it direct. I've already today, I noticed that your emails were included on some of the stuff.
Okay.
So I've got it and I'll forward it.
We are talking about in one of the ad hocs that Eric is in right now, about the opportunity for some of this sharing of your allocation across the zone boundary. If you're, and these are just concepts, if you're in the same farm unit, like it's your farm, but it's on the other side of a boundary and you did get it swapped in, but within some limits. We don't want somebody to now extend their farm from here and you buy a 100-yard wide space and you extend your farm all the way down to there and do a bunch of lots, you know, mergers or something, parcel mergers. And you're now like, yeah, I'm moving it all the way 5 miles that or whatever. That's within reason. We're trying to find some additional opportunities in case those things come up to be flexible.
I would hope that you work closely with MSGSA and MID so that you could move credits, however you want to call them, across MSGSA to wide area boundaries too.
That conversation has started. We need to have kind of an MOU between them.
Very delicate conversation. I'm not in the room, so I get it. It just takes time and.
Because there's a well, like somebody has a well in this parcel, it happens to be an MID's, but they use it to irrigate both ways. And it comes and gets irrigated over into MSGS. Okay, well, whose allocation?
That's different than what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is a MSGSA farmer has an allocation, 1.3.
Right, and you want to transfer over to the.
Yeah, and the same farmer, the field is split by the GSA boundary. It's the same exact field.
Right.
So, but he runs out of allocation on his wide area field. Can he
We're gonna
move?
work through those too. Yeah, those,
Because that,
all these issues around.
I would hate to see half the field not be irrigated when he's got this robust account of groundwater on the MID side.
You got your furrows running across and they're all dammed up here because you can't run water into the other side of them. There's a lot of one-offs, and I think that's one of the things, again.
This is the kind of stuff
simplicity.
Bob was talking about.
So, but I'm gonna come back to simplicity. We're trying to implement something. We want to say, definitely at the 5-year mark, a lot of these have to be figured out by then, but we're gonna probably have to refine and adjust.
A lot of it needs to be decided by July if you're gonna adopt this allocation.
On those kind of things, yeah.
What about recharge credits and leave behind and all that kind of stuff?
We're just gonna do what Madera did, because Lauren
Just-
loved it.
Just wait till after the fact. Do all the recharge and we'll tell you how it works later.
That was a 2023 issue. Let's hope we have more 2023
No, no,
issues.
the issue is they started the allocation before the rules on recharge were established.
There, well. We can
That- that's a
talk about that another day.
That's a cart before the horse.
But that is important,
Yeah.
that is.
Recharge is on the
That has
list.
gotta be settled.
Yeah, before the rules, before you start doing this stuff. It's gotta work in the portal.
Right, it's in the port, it is already recognized to be in the portal, same with surface
Yeah.
water, same with seepage agreements, other sources, will be there. The question about the documentation, how much credit you get for taking an action,
That's policy.
that's policy,
Yeah.
that hasn't been decided yet. But recharge will be part of the allocation, you're gonna have, going back to your point, you have a bucket for your sustainable yield and a bucket for your additional pumping allowance. Those are probably gonna be treated as one for the foreseeable 5 years. Then you'll have a bucket for seepage, a bucket for, I got a recharge credit, a bucket for a surface water source. And you'll have a bunch of buckets and you'll be using those buckets to meet your consumption. As long as you have enough in your other buckets, if you exceeded what was available from your native water, you're golden. The policy questions are which ones and how do I carry forward and which one do I use first? And, that's the information we're gonna wanna make sure we understand and get as right as possible. So these are the zones. Yes, talk to people. The next slide just shows the interactive map that you can go on the website. And you can go right to mercedsubbasinGSA.org and you can go do an APN search or zoom down and check every one of your parcels and start seeing. They were drawn when this was redone. So since you guys have seen it as TAC, and some of you have seen this at the board member meetings, but this was modified to try and follow parcel ownership also. And where there was a couple of parcels that looked like they were the same ownership, we made sure we included both of them one way or another. Tried to do that, but if there was a hopscotch, we didn't necessarily go up and hopscotch around. Does that make sense? So,
And Greg, you said there's some place on the website where if your zones are bisecting contiguous ownership, you can appeal.
there was a opportunity to appeal. I think it was, I don't have the website in front of me. Check the documents. Or it was in a maybe December of last year board meeting packet that might have been called out. And there was a form, I believe. Do you recall, Brad?
Yeah, there was a form to fill out and submit.
Okay. If you have trouble, just send me a note and send it to Ashley and me, and we'll get you pointed in the right place.
Great.
Next slide. So let's talk about the allocation framework. You just jump over those transition slides, don't you? This allocation framework was adopted, I shouldn't say adopted, I would say approved by the board as a draft framework for sharing out and starting to get more discussion at the February 8th meeting of the GSA. Couple of main points, focuses on irrigated ag only. There may still be allocations dealing with industrial, dealing with municipal, other things. We don't have a lot of that. Predominant use is ag. Two-tier allocation, a per acre quantity of sustainable yield of native groundwater, a per acre quantity of additional pumping allowance that is intended to decrease to 0 by 2035, unless, with the caveat asterisk, unless 2015 groundwater levels are achieved. And there's some more details about that. It also is intended to be a 5-year rolling bucket. So you get 5 years worth in year one. If you use more than 1 year's worth, you just subtract it into your future, but as you end year one, you're gonna now add year 6. And we'll look at what that looks like and on going forward. That sustainable yield number will be the same. The APA will be the one dropping down. And so that ultimately that bucket gets smaller, but that gives you flexibility to say, you know what? I want to go farm all the walnuts still for the next 3 years and age out my crop, and it's about when it's time it's done, and then figure out what's going on. You can just try and use all your bucket and however you need to do and manage it that way. So again, this goes back to those principles: flexibility, not dictating. It's not per acre; it's also gross. So if you farm 100 acres, sorry, your parcel's 100 acres, you farm 90 of it because of some turnarounds or some parking area or whatever. Your allocations are based on the gross acres. right? So as you start to reduce and modify, maybe you're only gonna grow 70 acres instead of 90, you're still achieving your allocation based on your 100 acres.
I have a question on that 3-year case scenario that you just said. Let's say you run it out for 3 years, then, you know, you're on your 5-year bucket, you're out of water in those 3 years and you decide to sell. What happens to your parcel?
That parcel will now have a flag on it that it only, you know, it's got whatever's left to it. So if it's gonna, let's say you had 3 parcels stitched together
Mhm.
and you used it all, and on one parcel, now you're selling off one of the other ones.
So it carries with
So
the
you
ground?
sell, yeah, that portion that's tied back to that ground that's now gonna get pulled off,
Mhm.
it's gonna have to carry with the ground that it just has sustainable yield left, that it's already used up its additional pumping.
Hmm.
But it's a great nuance point that we need to make sure we're addressing, because there's,
Well, yeah, because you could, you know, just,
you guys are smart,
Write
and you're
it
gonna
out.
figure out all sorts of ways to get around all sorts of different things.
it was your case scenario,
I
not
know.
mine.
But I wasn't the one,
plan on sticking
I wasn't
around.
the one selling it after 3 years.
Right, but
That
you're
was
out of
your-
water, so it looks like you're, you know, running up against a problem here, you know? But I'm just thinking, you know,
It goes back to anybody who's buying land, buyer beware.
yeah, and are you gonna
And
be
if
buying, you
If
know?
you're not smart enough to check all your water sources, you get what you deserve.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
hear
there-
you.
there's a-
I don't have a problem with it necessarily.
Same thing plays in with leases, because leases are gonna be able to come in and out of some ownership things, so there's gonna be challenges tied with that.
Yes, okay,
Right.
So, sorry.
interesting.
Brad.
To go back to your, you said allocations are based on your full acreage per that
Gross
AP, the APN number acreages. So, okay.
Yes.
That's one of my questions I was
Yes.
had for you.
Yes, but your use, so if like right now you're irrigating 80% of that land, because you got your house on there, you got a horse barn, corral for
Right.
your swimming pool and all your fancy landscaping.
Wetlands undeveloped, whatever.
So this might be in one of the other tiers, though. You got these tiers here.
Yeah.
If the entire parcel is designated as irrigated ag. Okay, so I think that's the part. You might have a carve out parcel where your property, your residence or something might be a little 2-acre carve out that's different. You might have land designated as irrigated lands managed wetlands, either contract or non-contract duck club. Those are recognized and have a different tax rate in the assessor system. So there's 3 different categories: irrigated lands, and we're defining those as irrigated anytime between 2015 and January 1, 2023. So you may have already followed it a year or so ago, as Sigma was rolling out, you're like, so you made a change. That will still be recognized as irrigated, because you're also probably paying the assessed price as if it's irrigated.
Yes.
For tomorrow, our water district, how are we supposed to tell people who have, 5-acre little ranchettes that they haven't irrigated ever since 2010? What are we supposed to tell them? You guys didn't irrigate, your SOL. What are we supposed to inform the public? How do we answer
So
that?
my first question is, are those 5-acre parcels registered as irrigated ag, or is it registered as rural residential?
Okay, that's the first question. Okay.
Well, some of them are gonna be 15-acre parcels out there.
You can have 50-acre parcels and they just haven't
I know.
been doing it.
I know.
So when we get to non-irrigated lands designated as grazing, which may or may not be.
You
a
gotta zoom
designation.
in on that map that they made on the zones and see
Mhm.
if it's the dark or the light. Isn't that right? Wouldn't that?
That
be the
would tell you
difference?
whether it's the irrigated, and again, I'm
not.
not sure if that's the assessor or the DWR layer,
Oh,
and so don't hold me to which one,
oh, that's right.
but
Okay.
that information is obtainable. If, and there, in the framework, you have an opt-in opportunity if you do want to start growing something on your parcel.
So less of an opportunity.
Lower,
It's
yeah,
gonna be
it's
less.
definitely a lower opportunity, and it goes back to the kind of concepts of correlative groundwater right. And Sigma cannot adjust groundwater, so we're trying to put rules in place that are recognizing what may have come out if you went through a whole adjudication.
So you only get the sustainable yield and get the APA. Is that correct?
Yes, and there's a further restriction.
You can't move it off the parcel.
Can't move the water off the parcel, and the well has to be on the parcel too. So you can't. Current ag land, does
Yeah. That's
that make sense?
not it.
So, next slide.
The two,
Appeal
2000.
process, that's important. There is an appeal process. that we'll
Oh,
consider.
Go ahead, Bob.
No, I just wanted to,
Yeah, the details of framework are in your packet.
yeah, I'm looking at it.
It's not that detailed.
Well, we'll see on the next
One,
slide.
one of the things that, and I maybe it's just premature, and I'm looking down the road, but the grouping and sharing among like designated parcels are allowed, under rules to be developed. Now, it is the thought that this is, a like designated parcel within a sustainability zone. If it happens to be a different ownership, but the same family group, you see a lot of people for tax reasons, you
Oh,
got
yeah, yeah.
LLCs, you
So-
got.
25 entities.
Let me cut to the chase.
You can have 5 different ownerships, but it's,
Absolutely. Let me
it's
cut
all
to the
like-
chase. The idea
They
is
call
if
it
you're-
management.
if you're managing it kind of collectively, you're part of a family or a co-op or a management team or something like that. Like MID does with their, what they call management, master agreement, master something or others. They got designations. What essentially, yes, we want to allow that. So you're going to say, and they don't have to be contiguous, but in a sustainability zone. So I got this parcel, I got this parcel, I got this parcel. This one's under Bob K LLC. This one's Kelly Enterprises. This one's BK Company. They all can be linked together in the platform as one unit and share the allocation as one big bucket to give that flexibility. Does that answer?
yeah.
That's the intent.
It does. It's gonna be quite a challenge for the administration of, or the implementation, but it answers my question.
Well, that's where the groundwater accounting platform we'll touch on at the end.
Yeah.
We're gonna give everybody these chances to get in, not chances,
Yeah.
but we're gonna try and get everybody in here in the next several months to start kind of getting every parcel designated to somebody. All the farming parcels. So then you're saying, yeah, this one's mine. Now, there'll be rules that say, hey, I'm leasing this to Larkin this year. Okay, it shows up in Larkin side this year and then it flips back. So MID does this in various ways where they share land and stuff, and we're trying to be consistent with things that a lot of the growers in this region are used to. So we're working on that language. Next slide. So additional limitations on pumping tier, any allocation above and below the Corcoran clay may be required. That's an in process. EKI is doing some analysis. We know the state through all their messaging and what they're telling, and on several different sessions I've heard them talk, are coming down hard on subsidence to where they're gonna like potentially put in legislation about wells and subsidence zones and all sorts of things that we may not have any control over. The point being is that subsidence, in order to stop adding to it, because there's potential for it to always kind of continue regardless if we didn't pump another drop, is we may need to start restricting below Corcoran pumping and shift to above Corcoran. Or so Red Top do this a lot. Triangle T's done this. There's other places where this is being shown as an example, but it's expensive because it's transitional, right?
And that's my biggest, aside from the quantity of the allocation, my biggest complaint is that they haven't separated
Yeah.
the upper and the lower.
Yet.
And that. you
How's
think
that
will be
study
done
going?
By July?
Yeah. So
That's it. So EKI is working on that. They told us in a meeting earlier today that they don't have materials to present yet, but they're working towards some of that. And that also is gonna have to be transitioned. You can't say, hey, this is rolling out, and by the way, your allocation of 24 inches total,
0.2.
well, has to be above. It'd be like, I don't have any wells, you know, that. So we're gonna have to shift in some way across time and make sure we're managing that. We have time because we put in interim milestones that seem to get adopted by DWR that says we can allow added subsidence for some period of time while we adjust and make these changes. And by 2040, we're not going to have any more. But we may in between now and then. Now DWR on round 2 of the GSP may balk at that and may not approve Merced's plan depending on how we're handling some of that subsidence stuff. So just recognize it's coming, it's intended, because we want to get more of that benefit occurring above, but the water isn't necessarily there, so we got a variety of things to address. You guys have it there.
We haven't, I don't have any deep wells. So,
Yeah.
yeah,
So you're
I'd
better.
like to be recognized.
I guess go 100% above right now.
I don't know. So I have a question on that, on the, I believe it was what, 0 threshold for any subsidence, and then, so maybe I should know this a long time since I've been in college. So the amount of water that we put on, you know, above the Corcoran clay as far as recharge goes, and that volume, that weight, all of that, if we're gonna pull all this water off of the rivers and put it out everywhere, is that gonna contribute to ongoing subsidence? Because now you're filling up the upper
There's-
aquifer and the profile there,
I've
to
understood
where
there's
it's always gonna be a trap. As far as
Well-
like, you can't get away from it, because now you're filling it up and you're adding to it, but you're pumping, now you're adding to it.
I get your point, and I think there's a lot of unknowns here about added weight on top and not filled pore spaces below, and are
Right.
you gonna compress more from that?
Exactly,
Or what combinations are happening?
right.
I know Westlands is doing a bunch of ASR punched below Corcoran.
I'm trying to fill up.
That's what they're doing for some of their recharge, is they have like 70 ASR wells.
Turner Island's trying to do that next door.
So there's
I
a
just tried
variety
all
of
of that. I'm really-
solutions that are unknown that we're gonna have to try and figure that out, but
Yeah,
you don't, and they're below Corcoran, they're pushing to 1,200 feet.
wow.
That's a pretty expensive column of steel.
Yeah, it is.
Well,
So,
I was just thinking, it's kind of
Low bang
like,
for
you know,
your
no matter
buck.
which way you do it, if you're not pumping, then you're recharging, and then now you're adding to subsidence, and then, okay, well, I'm pumping below the clay, well, now I'm adding to subsidence. So is it just like, there is no way out?
damned if you do, damned if you
And
don't,
you
right?
know what, it seems to me
No,
like the
I
rules
get
were
that.
written like that no matter what, that you cannot be sustainable. That's what it seems like to me. Not these rules, but I'm talking about,
At the state.
yes,
Right,
that's
right.
exactly what I'm talking about.
And I think there's a lot of efforts
Like they
to
pitfalled
find,
it all.
to find solutions. I think that's where Triangle T is doing a lot of, and even parts of Red Top are doing these projects to bring in water and trying to understand that better.
Mhm.
And are seeing like reversals or stoppage of subsidence rates or things like that.
Mhm.
With putting water on top. So I think there's more to learn, which is another reason why this GSA is saying, let's put these things in place and then let's try and again, have some certainty and all this, but adjust at the 5-year for our 2030 plan. And our update for the GSP then is going to need to adjust for more data and more understanding and more refinement for these things. And that might have further adjustments to how we deal with above and below Corcoran. It might have further adjustments as to how sustainable yield is allocated around our basin. I mean, we're a big horseshoe. We're not a giant bathtub because we've got MID in the middle of this.
So is it looking like EKI is not gonna be able to separate the two aquifers and provide us with data for that before this thing
No, they should.
passes?
I think that's stuff that's coming in the next week.
I think you
Okay.
delay July until that's
Yeah.
done, or you're just putting out incomplete stuff.
Or going down a road that you might not be needing to go down, you know, as far as like, okay, well, we set the path.
Subsidence is gonna
and that's
change
not-
everything, so why come out with something that can change it?
Right,
So
so
that's it.
they should be coming out
should
with
change
something
it.
that
They're-
would
they're-
separate the pumping requirements on both aquifers.
They're coming, there should have something coming out in the next weeks, and I don't know, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, where that stands,
Excellent.
to help inform some of that conversation. I don't know where that policy conversation is gonna end up,
Mhm.
but we should have some more information that'll help us think about
That,
what restrictions should or should not, and what kind of rate of change of that restriction may or may not need to occur.
so without having that like complete data and knowing that information, since it's still being worked on, how do they come up with any numbers?
The 13
Yeah,
and the 11,
right,
that's basin-wide budget based on all the Woodard and Kern,
Yeah.
said,
of what aquifer?
IGSM, of the entirety of both. And the total consumption and what's there. So they weren't just separating out like what's actually going above and below, because they were doing a multi-year, long-term kind of scaling. And then what if we implement this and we start by 2040 to 2090? Are we sustainable if we do these kind of reductions? It seems like a net.
In the Madera
Have the numbers?
subbasin
So essentially we have like,
25% margin.
we have 250
50%.
We have 250,000 acre feet of what we think it should be native yield to share.
It's all
Yeah,
based off the
basin.
modeling.
That's currently consuming, in a GSA, that's currently consuming 400,000. So we gotta, as I've said before, we gotta hitch up the horses to the wagon train and start heading from the Mississippi westward. How far we're gonna get and whether some people get let off in
Donner
Utah.
Pass,
If some people get off in Utah, some people get off in
Okay.
Nevada, some people go all the way to the
I
coast.
feel like I'm being left at Donner Pass, okay, like, we're all just up there.
And
Stuck.
the bank is the mountain.
Thank you.
Or the
See, I was
government.
seeing Donner
Like,
Pass
we're
as,
alive over here, I mean,
I was
come
seeing
on.
Donner Pass as I didn't have to go as far and do as much reduction. I didn't see it as. a
You stopped to go skiing.
Right, it's like, there's plenty of water, yeah. But you're on the cannibalistic.
Yes, that was the
Yeah.
cannibalistic
I see where
aspect of
you're
it,
going.
yeah, like, we're
We're gonna
getting
eat
eaten
each other.
alive, yeah, like, eaten
Okay.
alive.
In the interest of time, let's keep turning through this, because this is great conversation. This is what we need to continue, and we may need to
Real
have.
quick, I think they'd appreciate knowing that the EKI scope of work related to the Corcoran Clay study was on like the last agenda or the one before, the whole scope of work, the
Got
contract.
2 agendas.
Yeah, I remember they got a bump in,
Yeah, they got another fee, but
Right.
what they're gonna come out with is in there.
okay, that's good, thank you.
So the next point is APA may stabilize before reaching 0 if groundwater conditions and other GSP objectives are being satisfied. It also potentially be revised in future years consistent with the 5-year update to reflect data gathered. So if to get to our minimum thresholds of 2015 groundwater levels, plus other things about subsidence, groundwater quality, et cetera, we're doing these reductions and then we find things are stable. Let's go out in LeGrand, and they stop pumping and things come back up and we're actually in a good spot that maybe there's still more water. Maybe there's not, and maybe their 13 inches even has to shrink into the future and get smaller. We don't know because we don't have the data to support any determination at this point.
When
But
you
that's
say
been-
year, is it calendar year, water year?
So we are going to be monitoring based on calendar year at this point because you guys irrigate into what becomes now the new water year.
Right.
Whoever defined the water year that way, I don't know.
Calendar.
It started raining in October. And now you have to report to the state in October, even though you're irrigating your water right
In
allocation.
November. In
From the
November.
prior year's allocation. Anyway.
Yeah.
Sorry, somebody has to deal with all that reporting. It's a pain in the ass. Next slide. So let's look at the irrigated lands. You get both sustainable yield and APA. It's going to be on the gross parcel. And the grouping of like designated parcels would be allowed under the to be developed rules. We're working on some of that language right now, so that's why it still says to be developed. But the concept is linking these parcels that are all irrigated ag that cross over your operation. Or, you might be I don't think you have as many of these as you might down in, like Madera has a whole bunch of corporate farm management companies, and they've grouped a bunch of lands together as the farm manager, even though they're completely independent ownerships. There's not as much of that up here as there is down that way. Next slide. Managed wetlands. So now we have some lands that are designated as managed wetlands in the assessor's office. There's different tax base. Some are contract duck clubs and some are non-contract duck clubs. That has to do with whether you have a contract with the federal government and you have an easement over that private property to do certain things for habitat. You're going to get the allocation offered to parcels that choose to opt in. So right now you're not in unless you choose to be in. If you opt in, there's going to be a period where we're going to designate that maybe for a 3-month open window enrollment period or something. You'll get in that land and offered once maybe every 5 years. Do note there on the second line under the first bullet, to be developed procedures and associated fees. If you haven't been participating and now you want in and get some yield, and you actually can share this across some other parcels, you need to kind of play catch up with other people who have been paying into the whole groundwater irrigated management side of things. So what those are, don't know yet, but there's got to be a pay to play element, if you think of it that way. APA would be granted only for parcels that recently or currently pumped groundwater for habitat, and only the acres historically irrigated for groundwater as formed to manage habitat. No APA would be available for parcels that are not recently or currently pumping groundwater. Next slide. There should be 3 because we added an option or alternative here. There are some growers, and there's one grower who showed up at a couple of different board meetings recently. It's down there by Gallo's property, and they have a duck club that they just
Dallas Duck Club.
Dallas, yes. And they pump groundwater to serve that land, and they want to continue. We knew that the legislature is considering rules that would allow grandfather in higher quantities of water for duck clubs, for managed refuges, managed wetland areas, that would kind of be independent of an allocation. So we wanted to say, all right, if you're gonna go this path, here's essentially what we're setting up for managed wetlands. You can opt in your land, and that water now can become available to an entire and added to a parcel. So if you decided, I don't want to grow my wetland and duck crop, I'm gonna move it over here to my trees, you can do that. But you get sustainable yield only. If you want to commit to maintaining that as habitat, and we know that might need 3 acre-feet or so consumption, depending on whether they're doing fall habitat or spring or year round or whatever, you can get a bigger allocation tied to your footprint of what you were using between 2015 and 2020 for that managed habitat, but you cannot move that water anywhere else, and you have to maintain that habitat. So does that make sense of those 2 alternatives? You can kind of get this 13 inches and maybe move it around and share it with other parcels, or
The folks that want to shoot ducks for fun from out of town can get all the groundwater they want.
Right. I grow alfalfa, sustainable aquifer, and I can't
We're
anymore,
all
even
in
though
this
the
together,
hurdles are
except
there
for
all
the
the
ones
time.
who aren't.
Right,
so.
They want to
we
shoot the
did-
ducks.
right.
We did some analysis. So first off, this is calculated for the rest of the parcel gets nothing. So the actual footprints of the wetland, we did some analysis. They're not that big. There might be like 3,000 or 4,000 acre-feet total
It's- yeah,
of 250.
That's why it's not worth the fight.
And it doesn't include Brad's nice stock pond reservoir. That doesn't count. So it's truly things like Dallas Duck Club.
Where it has an easement on it. It has a federal refuge easement. They don't have to put water on it though.
Yeah. Be open. If you look at the way they wrote it in legislature, it does not include stock ponds or, fishing ponds or other things like that. So don't know.
They have a good lobby.
They do.
The point being is that we were recognizing something might be coming out of the legislature and forced down. So we're trying to get out in front of it and contain it to be, hey, we're already doing something that should satisfy what your intent was without taking a huge chunk of water and moving it off the table that's available to the growers. So that was what was being attempted here. Again, these are all for discussion, and the board's going to want input and thoughts on that. Party would be expected to maintain the managed habitat in a manner equivalent to historic conditions at a minimum, and would forfeit the special allocation and access to APA, and the equivalent sustainable yield limit would be redetermined if they decided they wanted to go back to not growing ducks. Next slide. Now grazing land. First and foremost, historic groundwater use for stock watering is allowed and essentially is grandfathered in. We're not trying to restrict anybody from pumping water to water cows. But if you're suddenly going to water the 10 acres of pasture next to your cows that you never did before, then that's going to not be allowed. You would have to, in that case, opt in. So there is an opt-in procedure. So you can go opt in again with some fees. You are going to only get sustainable yield, no transition water, no additional pumping allowance. An opt-in would be open for the same period as we talked about for the managed wetlands. And allocations should not be shared, could not be shared with any other parcel, and a well to extract must be located on the opt-in parcel. So remember all those lighter shaded areas we saw? If you was to decide, hey, I'm gonna go decide to grow something, but really what I want to do is buy 1,000 acres of grazing land so I can shift the yield over to my trees. No, you got to put the well there and you got to use it on that parcel. So if you really want to make that investment, make that investment. Part of the thinking behind that is mimicking what's happened in adjudications of dormant users on overlying groundwater. If you haven't been historically putting it to any kind of beneficial use, you generally aren't given an allocation and an adjudication process.
What about a farmer that had 1,000 acres and only planted 500 because he didn't have what
He gets,
but the other 500 is not planted. It's basically grazing land.
Right,
He can't opt that in and move it to his irrigated though, right?
you cannot move it over to his irrigated. Right.
So by not planting that grazing land, he's now not being rewarded for downsizing it. He would have been better off planting wall to wall and then taking some trees out.
Yes. which is why, if you remember, irrigated before January 1, 2023, between 2015 and
Yeah.
2023, because there could be that sudden rush on grazing land. I'm gonna go buy it, I'm gonna punch some holes in. And
Well, I
protect it.
get not wanting the grazing
Right.
land, but it's the farmer who was the steward who didn't plant wall to wall. But
If it's all one parcel and it's all irrigated land, because often, it's not often, but some of those cases, I didn't plant wall to wall, but that's still part of my APN. It's designated as
Yeah.
irrigated. If they subdivided the land, they're only paying a tax on the irrigated on one and a grazing tax, whatever the land value tax is on the other, that's different. So.
there's gonna be unique situations.
There's gonna be tons
for-
of
for-
one-offs,
for
which is why
everybody.
that appeal process
Yeah,
is
I get it.
noted.
It's just a no, I just know farmers, some of the old timers who chose not to go
Mhm.
wall to wall. And there's been a big rush where everybody just planted.
And that,
By non-farmers,
Huh?
by a lot of non-farmers,
Yeah,
everything got.
this
planted
is not,
on the wall.
that's not a unique issue to here either.
No, of course
There's
not.
several basins that are facing this challenge and trying to steer. it.
as surface water gets taken away
Yeah.
and everything else.
Next slide. Sustainable yield and initial allocation value. So next slide. Thank you for pausing on the
Sorry.
transition.
I was
That
trigger
helps for
happy
my
before,
mind.
yeah.
So this was in the GSP. This recognizes there was 570,000 acre feet of basin sustainable yield. Then it subtracted off chunks for the seepage of developed supply, so MID, and even Stevenson has chunks in there that are developed supply, are kind of like taken off the table. So the remainder was 440,000. Some of that went to appropriative users, which would be the cities and municipalities, and some of the domestics will be an overlying user. So the remaining 407 is what the basin had available essentially for native groundwater allocation. We continue to argue, and I know this is not fully resolved, the Miagousas continue or may push back harder, that we divided that amongst the 3 GSAs based on geographic total area in the GSA. So we get about 65% of that 407s, which is 270. We are reserving about 30,000 of that for federal, state, private wetlands. So that private wetland part is a little bit of that we just talked about, the set aside. The biggest chunk feds are not subject to state regulation. So they get to keep pumping, which is also one of the reasons why we're really trying to support the effort under FERC and Department of Fish and Wildlife to get more refuge water sent to San Luis Merced National Wildlife Refuge from MID for that agreement, because then it helps our basin, because it gives surface water instead of pumping groundwater. Domestic de minimis and opt-in. So we subtracted off about 30, cover all of those. Next slide.
Hey, Greg, couple
Yeah.
questions. Regarding seepage, there's several small water rights off of Mariposa, and some San Joaquin River and others that are in the sub-basin. MID's taking the seepage from their developed water supply, but there's all these other water rights where they're bringing in water. And there's obviously conveyance and seepage. Where are those? Can the farmers go to the wide area farmers come to the GSA and get seepage credits for their water right?
Question. This is something that's at the GSP level. I honestly don't really agree with all that 130 number and how that's been determined.
Well, yeah, I mean, MID's ran with that now. You're gonna have to unwind that. I mean, they're already dividing it up amongst their
The
farmers.
120, right? And a portion- that number comes from their ag management plan and includes rainwater that's routed down natural channels in the middle of January. Is that
Yeah.
really their water? No.
Well, I mean, that's a policy
They're
decision.
also
If you guys
arguing-
want to fight it with MID, I mean, I don't
They're
know if you
also-
should or you should.
Hasham
But-
said that number's bigger because we also get all the deep perk, and he wants to take that number from 170, or sorry, 120 something to even higher.
And
So that's an open debate.
yeah, what I'm asking about is the water right holders of the wide area guys, and where's their seepage credits and how do they get it?
It's unrecognized right now. If you have your water right, you have
It's
your
gonna
water
be
right.
small.
If
It's gonna
you-
be small, but it's gonna count.
If you have your water right, you get, You know, you say, hey,
You
the
obviously,
water I
you can
put on
submit
was,
that surface
it's my
water.
service water. Now, what you're suggesting is I conveyed it 2 miles in a ditch to my place of use.
Yeah,
That 2 miles of ditch seeped. I should get some credit for that. That's currently not in. I know Stevenson got something in because when they're developing it, Warder and Kern was asking for everything, right? So you guys submitted something.
Yeah, we have percolation studies
Right.
done in 2014, and we did it again in 2022 and 23.
But there was
We've
requests,
been actually physically measuring our loss in our canal.
there was requests for it initially, and that's what kind of spurred some of that. I don't know if those requests were heard.
it's a
or
big
made.
number for them, but some of these other farmers.
I know,
it's a
it might be
small
like
number.
50 acre feet or
Yeah.
something, but it's something, if, right? I get that.
Across 50 acres.
Yeah.
Ours is a lot bigger than that. We didn't have the data.
But you got a bureau agreement with it now, right?
No, I'm
No,
not
it's
talking about
different.
that. I'm
Oh, you're talking about
about-
conveyance.
I'm talking about conveyance seepage.
Surface
But if
water.
you operate the
Miles
entire,
and miles of canals.
if you operate the entire Lone Tree as one big farm unit,
Mhm.
which is possible, then maybe it doesn't matter.
Yeah, because all the surface water counts.
We'll see
Yeah.
how it works out, but it is something that we weren't prepared at the time to be able to inject that into the original.
So maybe that's something that's got to come in by the 2030 plan. We got to get that into the modeling because it matters.
Yeah.
You know, again, I think people are recognizing that every drop, people want to put an ownership mark on every drop of water. And that's not easy.
At some point, that will be also just places where we can do projects to limit the seepage that happens. Right?
There's all sorts of, I mean, there's solutions here. So it's like, we don't want to be deer in the headlights and not be able to move. We want to be able to be like, okay, well, this sucks, but let's start moving down here. Let's get better data here. Let me build a project there. Let me do this. So existing ag consumptive use is approximately 400,000 acre feet. And that's if we're gonna have 240 available for it, that's 160,000 acre foot reduction in the consumptive use of groundwater. Next slide. Now, in that 400,000, yeah, there's surface water, there's other things that are kind of tied in there, but the majority of that 400,000, we don't have it all broken out. That's the order of magnitude. So that's kind of the change. That first 15,000 is what we were trying to do with the land repurposing, to send a signal, to tell DWR we're doing something, so stay out of our basin. And to start that path and start giving those signals that something has to start to change. But here's where we have to go. Again, these are all just big picture numbers because we don't. How accurate is any of this? You know, we don't have it exactly, but it's directional. Again, we're hitching up the horses heading west. So that 160 is where we need to get to. So if we think about that kind of change and reduction spread over 170,000 irrigated acres, this remainder here, 240, is what's spread over 170,000 acres, and that's where you get 13 inches. And that right now, since we're not really sure if it should be a little different here or here, the policy was made universal, everybody gets 13 inches. So next slide.
How did you get the 168,000 acre feet?
Of reduction. So if you back into here, 270, and if we reserve this 30 for all of these things,
Yeah,
we get 240 left, 240 off of 400.
oh, that's the, okay, reduction of 160, okay, thank you.
240,000 divided by what? It's a 15 inches.
100 and some, 170 some odd thousand
Yeah.
acres.
Our math doesn't sound right. More than that.
Well, we're gonna run the number real quick. It's somewhere, I might be off on the irrigated acreage part that gets divided into it.
130, right?
So it's more than 130. It's
170.
170.
It
So it might have been
it was
160.
presented at the meeting, 107.
Yeah, this is
400
a,
acres in Mucil subdivision, yes, irrigated.
Yeah, it
So-
might be something, it comes out like 16 something, it must be.
there's another factor in there somewhere.
Yeah, it
So-
drops down for consumptive use, you know, that's not lost
Right.
for leaching.
Key is that's consumption. That's what is getting transpired by the plants and any maybe soil evaporation you have going on. That is different than pumping. You're gonna pump more than 13 inches. And if you're on super sandy soil where it just goes right back down to your water table, you can pump 30 inches and still just as long as you don't consume more than 13.
So that's applied water. That's what you're saying.
This is
Applied
consumed.
EPA.
This is ET of applied water, ET of applied water. So whatever term you want to think of it, consumptive use, ET of applied water. But it's not pumping. Your irrigation efficiency defines how much you have to put on to get that. And the reason we're that way is we ultimately have to back in one way or the other, whether you're taking raw meter data and limiting everybody to meters, which would mean we need a meter everywhere. We have one connection, just for the record, that just popped up. The APA was set at 11, and that again was analysis that EKI had done to say, here's what average all the consumptive use at in each one of those zones. The numbers vary actually by zone, but it's using the model that's got a bunch of grid spaces, and I do not like to sort of those things where you say, okay, zone 11 or zone 1 has, 12 inches of APA, and the other zone has a 0.6 inch. So 10.2, like, do we really know that? No. There's so what seems to be a reasonable number there. Get everybody started there. It's going to decrease unless groundwater levels are achieved. So it's essentially dropping about an inch a year on that number. Now let's go to how the framework is setting up with this 5-year bucket. So example of allocation. This is trying to illustrate the allocation. You see there 26, which will be the first year this is official. 25 will be a trial year. That's why we're adopting it in July 24. We have it as a trial year in 25. It'll be starting to be held accountable in 26. And then it goes to through the end of calendar year 35. It's kind of where you would drop to 0 on the APA. So you can see up at the top, sustainable yield, constant value, all the way out through 2045. The next line, APA, ramp down towards by 2035, the APA would be 0 after that point in time.
Unless you hit to sustainability.
Unless you, yeah, that caveat is always there. If your groundwater levels and other sustainability indicators are being
That's
met.
very important.
Now, is
Super
that
important.
across the whole zone has to be sustainable, or is that just my farm unit?
That's the whole zone, which
The whole
goes back
zone.
to these buckets are super important. Where he has a seepage bucket,
Yeah.
It's
and a
important.
seepage bucket.
It's important for you guys to get in a river influence zone.
So
That's the answer.
I know exactly what's going through your mind, and let's try and figure out answers. Okay, but recognize when we're looking at this on the global scale, this is the way this is getting set up. So when you're in 26, you're going to have your 26 bucket is your 26 sustainable yield and the APA numbers, 27, 28, 29, 30. Then the next year, you're going to start with 27. You're going to subtract off what you actually used in 26, which may have been more or less than what was available to you on those two combos, depending on what they were doing on your entire farm unit. And then you'll add year 6. And then with the end of year or that second year, you'll be now starting the third year, you'll subtract off what happened that second year. You'll add year 7 and so on. You come down here. So next slide shows one with these numbers. Now this assumes for purposes of this discussion and consumptive use, ETAW of 2.1 acre feet per year. That might be, I don't know, what are sugar beets running right now? 20.
No one grows those here.
Sweet potatoes. I meant sweet potatoes.
Oh.
Sorry. Gosh. Start with an S.
We don't have any lemon
No,
guys here.
Potato people. All right. What are tomatoes running?
2.1,
Okay, there you go. Tomatoes. Now that's on almond. Almonds are,
3.5.
and it depends. Like I've seen them down
Yeah.
at 28. I've seen them at 42. Right. So it's like, don't know. This also, again, ETAW. We don't have it written out yet, but effective precip is accounted for here. So you get a super wet year, that's going to benefit you. A super dry year, you're putting on more water to address that. It's going to hurt you. So that's part of the reason for the 5-year bucket. So you can see in this particular setup, the 0.1, which is 13 inches set to an acre feet instead of in inches per acre, and the APA. So you have 9 feet available to you in your starting bucket per acre. Then you have 8.4 feet on down. If you were consuming 2.1, you essentially have no more water and you're upside down and you need to do something different by out here in like 2037. That's trying to give time.
It's a slow death.
That's a slow down. One of the things that's being discussed within the board is concepts of trading within the zones where maybe Scott, you're like, I'm done with these parcels for a while, or I'm taking a couple of years off, and you maybe can transition your allocation for those few years to a neighbor. Right.
I'm definitely in
things-
favor of that.
those-
Give the farmers the flexibility.
That's,
We need that
They
flexibility.
so
need it.
we're, so not only within your farm unit, but we're talking about, the board is talking about some sort of marketing. I hate to use the word markets because they can get people crazy,
That's what's coming.
but the opportunity to be able to share your allocation to somebody else, recognize that's all paper.
Farmer to
If
farmer.
I'm not gonna pump it and I'm gonna allow Brad to pump my allocation, but Brad's 3 miles away, still in the same zone, he's really just pumping more 3 miles away. It's not like I pulled it out of the ground.
Yeah.
Sent it to him.
We all
Yeah,
need
no,
that.
we need that flexibility.
We need it.
So that's being constructive, but we're not looking at it to necessarily go zone to zone. We're trying to keep it within those zones.
I
Because of
think
hydrogeologic movement of water.
I think you can't really move it east to west, but you can move it west to east and not do damage.
We're kind of limiting it within the zone right
Yeah.
now. Now, there may be furtherance, and to your point earlier, agreements with MID, or
Yeah.
MSGSA, to be able to cross some boundaries there. We're trying to find opportunities for flexibility.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, that was a big drop off on that curve.
You have situations that occur where in like a wet year, like last year, a lot of people don't have access to floodwater,
Mhm.
even though it's rolling on through the county. And there would be, I could see where Lone Tree, as an example, Lone Tree could essentially sell sustainable yield to somebody else within their zone.
While you use recharge.
While we're using either riparian or appropriate,
Yeah.
et cetera, water.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which
That-
that allows you to sort of share
Uh-huh.
The benefit.
the benefit of that.
Yeah.
And keeps more acres farmed.
Exactly, which gets to the economics.
Yeah.
So now that said, what we also have to be a little cautious of is you're doing that and you're transferring your allocation to Brad. And Brad's like, whoo, and he's pumping and
Causing
subsidence suddenly
subsidence.
at a well near there, suddenly we see a trigger of our subsidence numbers at some USBR monitoring station. Flags go up in Sacramento. Uh-oh. So we have to be thinking about making sure we don't create that situation by adding enough flexibility.
Well, Brad's a good citizen. He's gonna pump from the upper op.
Only.
Well, we all know Brad's a good citizen. Now, whether he'll do the second part of that, I don't know.
I want everybody
So,
to do well.
I've
That's
got a
all.
hypothetical situation. So say we get on down the road here further where we're at 13 inches or whatever. And that's all we have is 13 inches. So I decide, okay, I'm gonna dry farm 2/3 of my ranch and I'm gonna plant 1/3 of it to something that uses about 3 feet of water.
Yeah, okay.
And I grow a wheat crop out there and it's a tremendous wheat crop. And I get penalized and I haven't irrigated it, but I've used 13 inches of water just dry farming wheat on a good year.
So this
How does
is
that-
the effective precept part that comes in. So a couple of things. One, we should be able to make sure that you can prove that you didn't irrigate. Because there's gonna be somebody, yeah, I didn't irrigate, but you
Right.
actually did, right?
Right.
So there's always bad actors. We cannot solve all those problems. Just
Right.
recognize that. You're an upstanding person also. You wouldn't do that every day, you know? You're like Brad, you guys share it. That there's a couple ways to look at effective precip. In 23, we had so much rain.
Right.
That easily the effective precip handled all of that. And we want to make sure that that land is recognized as not using any of your allocation. Yeah, you grew a crop, great, awesome. Congratulations, that's awesome, that's what we want. We want those kind of situations. You should not be penalized. There's another angle that says, well, what if we only got a couple inches of super dry year, like 22, right? There was hardly any rain that came through. And you actually put water on that wheat crop and put water over here. Now we got to be able to tag you for that as part of your consumptive use, which is why maybe there's a 5-year bucket to help spread across that. We can, and this goes to the simplicity arguments, we can just have a constant It doesn't matter wet, dry, or indifferent, you get 8 inches of effective precip every year, regardless, just taking off your ET number that we'll look at remote sensing. And the rest is you must have applied water to it. What are your sources? Or we vary it by year based on some sort of equations. And that's a challenge too, because everybody's watched the thunder cells or whatever. It's like, well, you got a bunch and you will dry. And so I don't know what the right answer. A couple of different places down the valley do it differently. I think some of the Thule, Kauai guys do it as 6 inches that they just take off. Regardless of the year type, you get 6 inches of credit for rain. We should get more up here because we're a little bit wetter. So you could go that path. That has not been discussed, but it's part of the conversation right now for setting this. We have to have figured out before July.
Yeah, there is some way of handling it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's recognized that it would. So in that sense, in your situation, you should not be penalized for getting a great yield because of rain.
Or even an average one in some years. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
What company's doing the satellite from Merced?
So segue. Let's go to a couple of examples here real quick, because Brad, you have a hard stop at 4. I also want to make sure if there's another meeting you guys want to have scheduled for April, we get that understood here. And if there's any main topics you guys want to talk about. This is just an example. I grabbed this one from some of the well consistency reports we were doing because we happen to have an ET. But this is a rough, so this is about 200 acres. Their ETAW is about 700. So your initial allocation is 200 acres times 13 inches, because again, it's the gross. Their farming area is less than 200 acres. You get 215 acre feet. Your APA is 185. So your first year number is 400. Your second year is 375. So that's just because your APA is reducing. So your year 1 bucket is 1,700 acre feet, essentially. So then we go to year 2, we have 1,700 acre feet. We use 700, plus we add the year 6 water, year 6 SY and APA, you get these other numbers. So now you go into year 2 with 1,375. You go to year 3, again, blah, blah, blah. Next example is similar, but we're now farming a field crop of some sort. I don't know what was actually out here, but its number was about 60 acre feet and 42 gross acres. So they're only farming about 30 because they have about 10 here is all this part in their parcel. You run through their numbers and they actually start to come out positive because they're using less than they're getting into their bucket right now. But that's going to end up balancing out at some point where they're going to not have enough in their bucket, potentially at some point in the future. So
the buckets carry forward.
Buckets
If you
carry forward.
don't use your complete APA, the bucket carries to
It's
the
going to
next
go. It's going to go forward into the next year. So these were 2 quick examples, but to try and illustrate how this bucket is working on an entire parcel. It's like, yes, this is a number by acre, but it's accumulated. And so if you have multiple parcels in your farm unit, it's going to be adding all of those together, and you may fallow that one land. You may plant it to dry your crop, you may not. And all of that's part of your number, and it's going to kind of go through this process. Now, all that's dealing with the groundwater allocation. On top of that, you got a riparian right. You got a settlement agreement with MID for surface water. You got some seepage water. You got recharge credit or something. Those all add on and would be other numbers out here in your buckets to represent that. So next slide gets to the accounting platform, which is where the remote sensing was asking for.
It's OpenET is the answer, right?
That's what's being used for right now, but
Yeah.
that's not the only pathway. So
OpenET is the one that's
we are,
NASA.
we got asked to, we were able to force our way into the piloting of this groundwater accounting platform that's being paid for through grants through the state right now. MSGSA was already a member. We found out, we made some calls to some of the parties at EDF and some others, and we got added, which was awesome. And they actually are modifying this to deal with our situation a lot. And they're really happy. Who's been in the grower meetings? George, you've been in, Bob, you were in. So we had a couple of sessions with a subset of growers to kind of test some of this. The platform will allow you to be able to track all of your fields. And this is just one view. You'll be able to see all your fields. You'll be able to see what's going on and how you're using and what all your buckets of water you have available. Plus, it'll be the interface to be able to submit information. Like I got a transfer deal, or this is my surface water contract, metered supply or something. That tracking that's happening is happening from remote sensing in this case. We're going to keep the door open to allow a couple of different sources of remote sensing because there are multiple vendors. OpenET is essentially right now a free, but probably will go to some sort of subscription service, but it's going to be one of the low cost versions. It is being used now, rolled out across all the way out to Nebraska, and they're starting some in Florida of this. So there's a lot of momentum behind it.
It's pretty accurate.
Yeah,
Most people agree.
Well, I would make a comment, you don't just want to use the cheapest one, you want to use the most accurate one that you don't pay too much for, but accuracy is more important than anything.
the thing I really like about OpenET, and I was at a conference the end of February down in Albuquerque, they had me come and talk about how we're using it in some places. There are a bunch of academics and researchers. They're forcing all of those other platforms and the mechanisms behind it. There's several different algorithms that have been developed to get more and more aligned. So the accuracy is continuing to improve because of this more and more open source use of it is forcing it to all become better, which is awesome for folks like us that want to use it to help do something cheaply.
Hey,
Or not
Land IQ
cheaply,
is
but-
the other one, and they're comparable in terms of accuracy.
What was the one?
Okay.
what's
So
the one
Land
you used in
IQ
Cordero originally?
AirWatch,
AirWatch,
yeah,
and AirWatch has been bought by a company called Hydrostat that's launching their own satellites this year right now. They're an international company. They're doing a bunch of refinements to AirWatch's platform and its methodologies. So I don't know what's coming out of that, but they also were, they're a costly endeavor. Land IQ costs a fair amount of money.
But good,
There's
there's good and bad about all of them.
all of them have good and bad. One of the pathways we were going to have is the data that gets loaded into this platform from the GSA could come from a number of sources. We could get OpenET could be our default. Maybe if somebody has a meter that we've approved, we could use their meter data as long as we back out to account for irrigation efficiency and uniformity or whatever. So we're essentially being able to recognize what went to ET. So that's what the platform's doing. This last slide here is on OpenET. And it's just, if you haven't gone out here and played with this, the website is etdata.org. You can go in, you can go find your parcel, you can click on your parcel, and you can see data back. I think right now it's limited to 2018 for some reason. They did an adjustment. We have
Pretty damn good.
we have our access back to 2016 still. And you can see the monthly data. And it's about a month behind, roughly, as to when you see the ET data. And you can really see what's happening. You can also go to a raster view and you can see within your field. You're like, oh, there's a little hotspot there versus not. And you probably would be able to recognize that as some soil challenges or other things you're actually seeing. And you're noticing on yields or whatever. So it's really powerful from that standpoint. And it's being applied in a lot of places like the Plain States and other things are tying it into a lot of their big infrastructure that they're using for irrigation and yield management. And a variety of things are doing on, those 10,000 acre soybean farms and corn or whatever. It's a little larger scale.
Where all our federal ag money goes.
Yeah. So I think that was the last slide. Is that right? Last slide?
Can I ask a question? When I was at the
What's next?
accounting platform, the website was groundwateraccounting.org. Now you have a new one called etdata.org?
No. Sorry. My bad for the confusion. The groundwater accounting platform is a platform that's at that first website. They are utilizing spatial remote sensing from OpenET. If you want to go out right now to OpenET, because besides you and you and you, nobody else has a login to the groundwater platform. They can't see anything there like you can because you were invited in as kind of a tester. You can go out to OpenET data, etdata.org, and go look at at least
Anybody's field.
ET data.
Oh,
You can go look at everybody's
Those are
field.
two separate
You just
locations.
zoom,
find out a neighbor.
you just zoom in like
It's fine.
Google Earth and it gives you ET data like that.
What's next? Continued outreach, invitation to the groundwater accounting platform. We're going to send out postcards that are going to give everybody a pin sometime in April. So everybody should be able to get into the groundwater accounting platform and start listing all of their parcels that are theirs and claiming them.
yeah, and what I would recommend is enter them as irrigation management group, not accessory parcels, because those you don't irrigate according to an accessory parcel.
You don't farm them by
Irrigate
that.
according to an irrigation management group. So
Tell me in
the
your
quicker
mind,
you
what's
put that together, the more the stuff's gonna make sense.
What you're gonna see is a bunch of APNs in your account and by your entities, and then on your side, you're gonna group them into a management unit.
Right. Yeah. There's also, the reason I was asking is in Madera, and they're trying to look at how to accommodate this. There are places where field, the construction layout of the field crosses APNs. And so they have a field parcel condition also. So they're looking at how to try and
There's all
address that
kinds
if that's unique. So everybody, there's so many one-off situations we're trying to get.
I think I have a lot of that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
And, but I did within the same APN, I have a tenant too.
yeah.
Okay,
Because I only have I have like 4 large APNs.
yeah.
And I have a tenant farms, say like one side of it and I farm the other side of it. And then the fields within that may cross over the other APNs. I mean, there's no.
So in
The
that
fields were made
situation,
just haphazardly years ago.
you may lump it all as one farm unit, all those APNs, and you may have to have a separate arrangement with your tenant so that they aren't taking all your allocation. They've right-sized their allocation, because it'll probably be back in your responsibility. Because I don't know if we can carve them out and give them their own. Not
Probably.
initially.
Probably not initially, but probably eventually you should be able to.
Yeah, within an APN though, that's
Yeah, I
might start
get-
to get a little.
I get
Maybe
fuzzy.
nobody's taking his allocation.
Exactly. That's what I'm saying. You write the
Start
agreement.
putting
the
in
right
those
way.
sideways wells.
No, you just write the agreement that there's no promises of water. Hey, you didn't have a, never know. So allocation and policy adoption in July is the intent, again, because of that timing to get it into the GSP so we can recognize it's real. And DWR can be like, wow, look at all the great stuff they're doing. Yay, I'll pass it again. And give us 5 more years before we have to do a plan again. Testing during 25, that should say calendar year. I wrote that wrong, and fully functioning in calendar year 26. Fully functioning may also include some fees, penalties that might be developed during 25 to figure out that.
2 questions. Are we planning for staffing up to help people understand the ETs? Because you're gonna have people, just from my area, I can tell that people aren't gonna know what that is. So they're gonna need help doing that.
Translating between pumping
Yeah,
and what's
I
considered.
foresee that on the horizon. Secondly,
And you guys are gonna assign the talking points to Brad, and somebody will let them.
yeah, Brad, you're up, bud.
You're up, Brad.
I hope you come to the meeting. Also 2025, you're talking about fees and stuff.
We'll be developing
How
fees
do
in
we,
2020.
you're gonna need some enforcement. I mean, I don't know what that's gonna look like, but I know we've talked about it before. I mean, it's gonna get to the point where you very well may need someone to go out and cut power lines to some roads.
Actually, it's gonna start a whole squadron of black drones
It's what's gonna be needed.
and
It's,
some sort of.
I still hear people talking about, I don't give a crap about this. What are they gonna do? Come and throw me in jail?
And the answer could be a lien on your property, right? So in the Rule 1 groundwater policy right now about new wells, there is a section at the end that has penalties and enforcement that were pulled out of the Sigma authorization. Those will ultimately get ruled probably into their own version, so not be buried in that rule. Since those are authorities to Sigma, to the GSAs for Sigma, those will be kind of the limits of authority also, but they do talk about, you can take somebody to court, you can put liens on property, you can do those kind of things, you can have a fee assessed, a penalty assessed. More importantly, those are penalties. The fee, so phase 1 fees sunsets at the end of this tax year, or one more? I'm sorry, I forgot.
The 2018 thing?
Yeah,
Yeah.
no, not the 2018 one, the
218.
phase 1,
Sorry, 218.
the phase 1, 218, yeah, because there was a 2019, 218, so
Right.
nomenclature wise, that's that baseline where it's like 50 cents for grazing land and
Right.
450 or 5 or something for irrigated, whatever
8
that.
times, so it's 8 times the base.
Yeah, so it's whatever that number is, and then the phase 1 was for this temporary thing of doing.
Well, let's not go into that here.
Going into everything else, that all sunsets.
Right.
They're starting a discussion about the new fees, and that's something that would then be discussed and ultimately rolled out in 25. That likely, the big driver there is, do we have enough to cover admin in that 2019, that original one that just pays nominal to pay admin, to pay all this stuff that's got to run this groundwater platform, Or do we need to collect more? And do you do that still based on an acreage, or do you do it based on volume pumps? And then how do you manage that? Because we're not looking to build projects. This GSA is not about going and building new giant recharge facilities. They were putting that on the onus of the independent participants.
So are we gonna have some TAC committee meetings discussing the plan to funding, or?
I'll just roll it out. Lack of transparency is our goal.
I mean, how far out, though, so there's gonna.
I didn't even get a smile like a Bob.
They need to come, they need to come soon, I would think.
They're starting those conversations. There was an ad hoc that was starting that, so that will start to roll out. Again, that will be something that would have more conversation into the fall and into next year, and wouldn't be adopted until fall of 25 to become implementable in 26.
Okay.
Wouldn't you think that there would be, in these other states that already regulate groundwater pumping, that there should be an awful lot of administrative procedure with regards to enforcement, and all you should be able to copy. You shouldn't have to stop it and think up everything from scratch.
It's a good question. Like Texas, what's the Texas groundwater quality?
Colorado.
What is it?
New Mexico.
Colorado, New Mexico. There's, they have always had groundwater as part of their water rights management. So it might have as many craziness as our surface water has been built into it, but it also there might be some things to learn. One of the keys, I think, is we're also looking at other GSAs who have implemented and what's failed and what's succeeded. And let's see what we can learn from that. But I think the biggest picture is we're not building projects as this GSA. You don't want this GSA to go buy water, so we don't need to accumulate a lot of money going forward. We're trying to do something to get the ball rolling, to keep the state. I mean, the fact that we got Merced subbase, people were surprised Merced subbase and GSA was approved. When you talk up and down the valley, people were like, I couldn't believe you guys got approved. I'm like, yep, we did. We kept DWR out and the state board out. That's huge. We don't plan to do projects. We don't need to spend a lot of money. We just need to implement and monitor. Like Roberto would say, that shouldn't be a big bill.
So it's probably all gonna be administration fees coming up.
That's my guess, which, then you go to volumetric and it's like, well, hold it, is that the right way, or is it partial
Yeah, it doesn't
volumetric,
seem like-
partial fee, like you have in your irrigation district, you have essentially your standby or your fee to be in the district, and then you pay for water. So maybe there's things like that, but again, if we don't, Prop 218 says you need to know what you're getting out of that. If we're not building $5 million recharge basins and acquiring surface water to bring in, we don't need that money anymore.
Right.
So, that was part of the thinking on phase one, is to get us forward, to keep DWR out, get us moving, and then rethink the whole fee structure so we can be something that's appropriate across the basin.
You might be supporting grant writing, et cetera, to build projects,
Oh, yeah, like we're doing already, right?
but not actually
Not build
doing the actual.
or own them.
Yeah.
So like LeGrand, there's grants that were done with LeGrand for building that interconnection off of one of those MID canals and stuff. That's LeGrand's project, but we helped get the grants through the combined MSGSA, MSGSA applications. So yeah, you're absolutely right. Is that, now, so meeting date, and what do you guys want to tell the board, if anything? Lou, are you still with us, or are you gone?
Thank you.
Okay, so you're gonna assign it to Brad or Lou, if you want to make it.
I think Brad typically comes to the meeting.
Yeah.
I've seen him several.
Yeah.
George and Bob come to the meetings too.
I would support another meeting date in April.
Yeah, me too.
So if we were to look for the same sort of thing, which is the, what did we say we were?
Tuesday.
Fourth
23rd
Tuesday,
of April.
April would be the 23rd.
I'm sorry, yeah.
I could do the 23rd at 2 o'clock if we plan at the same time. Is that doable?
Yeah.
We'd have to get that, we'll get that notice sent out.
Yeah.
And because this is a Brown Act regulated body. That's why we have to meet in person. That's why Lou wasn't counting.
Yep,
Right.
yeah, I understand that.
Yeah, I'm good for that too.
And then what topics did you want to go over during that meeting?
Probably more of the same, right?
More of
You
the
get
same
feedback,
thing.
Discussion.
continue discussion on allocations and the framework and feedback.
I think that I'll definitely be able to report back on how the meeting goes that we have tomorrow for the outreach. So is it correct in my understanding that when we have public outreach, you have to have 2 board members present?
No,
Okay.
you can't have more than, you can't have a quorum. So
Yeah,
you can have up to, you can have none, or you can have up to where 3 is not a quorum still. George, I'm looking, you know. Bob, do you
I thought
remember?
that for public outreach, there was some point, I thought that we had to have 2 board members present to try and answer questions. and-
We're wanting and encouraging that,
Okay,
because at the end of the day, it's the board members who are adopting this, and so to
Right.
hear commentary and input from around the basin is important. Otherwise, it's staff hearing it, consultants, and translating it and trying to do something, so that's why. Sorry, I'm trying to make sure I get this blocked on my calendar, I don't screw it up either. So
I must
for
have
like your
misheard.
tomorrow meeting,
Right, that's what I'm,
you do have,
we've got Eric,
Eric is still on the board.
yeah.
I've asked if Mike wants to try and come. I don't know if anybody else is really gonna try and show up or not.
Yeah, it'd be nice if, because Lloyd's our county representative.
It'd be nice, and
So it'd be
that's,
good if he could be there.
you know,
I don't have his contact info.
thanks, George. Now, not, this is not meant in any way an excuse out for us, but Lacey had a lot of this stuff dialed. So this is the appreciation of what Lacey does, that
Right,
poor Ashley got like left in this giant ocean on a raft with no oar.
welcome to, I don't know if I'd use the term raft, it's more like welcome to the firing squad.
No, it's just float, rafts are out by water.
Yeah, good luck.
Okay, we're out in the desert where there's no water. 'cause
Exactly.
they don't have
Yeah.
allocation. She's doing an awesome job coordinating a bunch of things, and, you know, so bear with us on a couple of those things.
Yeah,
Don't know if we formally invited board members out to tomorrow, because Lacey was arranging that before.
okay,
And then the Farm Bureau one, we just settled on that date, and we got secured the facility, and so actually we should probably put a notice out to the board members or through Lloyd or something, and invite at least 2 of them.
I know that Lloyd can't make the April times,
Okay,
but I
if
can.
Nick or Gino should, well, Gino should, I think Gino said he was gonna try and be there. If you get is a quorum 3 or 4? We got 6.
You
I think it's
you have to have more
because you
than,
have 3 on your ad hoc
Right.
committees.
You're right, okay, and that's not a quorum.
That's not.
So we can have up to 3 show
Board
up, but if we have a 4th,
then one
somebody
of
has
them
to
has to leave.
leave.
Yeah.
Because otherwise we'd have to have noticed it as a
Yeah.
public board meeting and advertise the agenda,
Yeah,
all the rest of that. Who knows?
so I can call Lloyd and see if he can make it to tomorrow. Maybe I'll get contact info for Lloyd before you leave. Yeah, perfect, that'd be great.
So you've been quiet the whole time.
I'm just curious on the future of allocations. That's it. Let's see what happens.
Yeah.
Uh,
We taking over under bets or anything?
No. I mean, LeGrand
Yeah,
just,
putting the
LeGrand just seems like they have some infrastructure in place, but nothing. We're all in the same boat as you guys. That's where we're mainly our acreage is at.
And I think the interesting thing with LeGrand is a bunch of those growers entered into agreements with MID to buy water when it's available.
We did. Yeah, this year there's no extra water available,
Right.
unfortunately, but I mean, there is some water.
But like last year, there was water. And so those would be on top of these other buckets, you would have that water
Yeah.
available, which would allow you maybe to roll forward some of the.
The only bad part is, even if you have infrastructure, they don't let you put it into other blocks next door. I don't know why. I hope they work on that in the future.
And that might accommodate with farm unit considerations, because that parcel next door could just be part of the same unit and therefore share.
Yeah.
Some manner. But that's there's probably other politics that's driving some of that.
Oh, yeah.
We don't want to get involved with.
Yeah,
Fair enough.
Yeah, thanks.
Anything more? What else do we have on our agenda? I think that was it, right?
How many
Just
are
the
over
next
and under the 2015 thresholds right now as far as the zones go?
Everybody except for Stevenson, zone 8 was not in compliance with 2015 minimum threshold.
Those are the things I think we gotta,
Again, your situation,
I know, but
we
my
gotta find a way
situation,
to
I'm
deal
still
with it.
getting screwed, you know, that's the
I
problem, is
understand.
that like, I don't know, you know, how many of us can make it 5 years until everything else gets figured out, and I don't think we should, like, I'm just kind of
He's
trying to.
gonna give you a note for your banker.
Yeah,
Don't worry,
exactly.
in 5 years things will be better.
Greg says it's gonna be okay,
Wow, if I had that kind of power.
I'd be asking for a note, you know. I'm
I'll be
thinking,
asking for a note for myself.
I'm thinking of, I can only control what I can control,
Yeah.
right? And if our well levels were at, you know, 67 feet below ground surface at 15, and they're at 20 feet now, what else am I supposed to do? Like, I feel like I'm getting taken down with the rest of the ship, and I
Right.
can only do what I can do, right?
So
So
the
I don't-
ways to contemplate that I think there's solutions that could be acceptable. Again, we have to think about
Is
precedent
that,
setting.
is that like the appeal
It's-
situation that you're talking about in the back?
Well, I was thinking through the recharge policy,
Okay,
that your recharge is occurring essentially sublateral recharge, which is a thing.
right,
It's done in other places where it's actually put sublateral from the surface. Kind of say the rivers are creating sublateral recharge. So I wonder if there's a pathway. So you have allocation of sustainable yield, you have APA, and then you get a recharge credit that associates when the river flow is X or gradients or, something.
and that kind of goes back though to the whole, they pitfalled every angle to where if you're, you know, you're gonna get screwed one way or the other, in my opinion. Because
Well,
it's like, then you're using the water from the river and you can't have interconnected surface water.
We need the recharge policy, because last year we recharged a lot of water, and we need to get credit for it.
Yeah.
And we need a recharge policy before this comes.
Yeah, the challenge, I agree. And so the thing we need to work through on
So
that,
recharge is definitely,
from Madera's
And whether
standpoint,
that's, and the credit you get for using river water versus well water.
See you
Have a
next
good one.
week.
Thank you, Greg.
thank you, Bob, we'll see you tomorrow. Do you guys pump directly out of the river too? And
Yeah,
apply it?
I've got a permit right
Okay,
on San Joaquin, so that helps me
and a repairing or just?
just appropriate on the San Joaquin, right? That reclamation bought our riparian rights.
Okay.
They can't do that, but they did.
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
Go fight that one back at DC.
Yeah, yeah.
So Larkin, I don't know what, Scott's got some situations that they're been working through. Whether you're in the same place but just haven't gotten those formalized, I don't know.
I'm
if that's
across the
the case.
street and don't have a seepage agreement, and they're not offering one, and they're not offering any more as far as I know.
Right, because you're across the street.
No, I'm adjacent to him. I just
Adjacent
happen
on
to
the
be south of the
upstream.
highway and upstream. It's just,
Yeah.
from what I understand, after talking to the Bureau, I believe that they're not offering any more than the ones that they've offered right now. And so that's it. So, our 65-acre almond orchard that toppled over last year because of seepage, doesn't matter. So-
Waterlog and high wind and.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And so, I'm just thinking, like, I can only control what I can control, and if our water has come up 40 feet and we're at about 20, 25 feet, how do I prove that I'm sustainable? And if that's not sustainable, then please show me where in the county is sustainable so I can learn from them and figure out what to do to survive this. Because I feel like I'm doing everything I can do. I don't know what else to do, but I'm really getting penalized for everything. You see what I'm saying? Like, I'm playing the game by the rules, and I'm not, like, my wells aren't getting recognized for what they have, or the fact that, like, we are stable. So when it's got the appeal here, it says application of historic groundwater conditions when compared to those current groundwater conditions. So, I mean, if we're, we don't fluctuate more than 40 feet, like, everything bounces back up when the river runs, what do I do?
First off, I think. So there's one-offs all over the place.
Right,
We we have to, this is a fine line to walk. Find a way that your situation is like, look, nature is providing a fairly stable groundwater level, but when you average across the district, I'm lumped in with people that
Are causing
Are-
subsidence.
are, and I'm gonna go back to the correlative thing, it's like, here's the river, and here's way inland, and a pump here is getting deeper and deeper, and you're like same elevation. Well, is the gradient dropping because you're not letting enough go past? I'm not accusing you of that whatsoever. But let's make sure that if that's not the case, then are there special circumstances that we can recognize that say, look, this person's not seeing those changes. You heard Bob say inland does see a response tied to the river.
Right.
So there is a connection.
Right.
And
There's
You
a
get it.
connection, but it's minimal.
you get more and they get less. What we want to set up, not set up is suddenly, cross the board, across the county road battles between landowners.
Well, that's already
So-
going on, so I mean, it's really,
That ship sailed about 40 years ago.
Red
right?
Top is to my east, so in,
That's our biggest problem.
so where I'm at there.
Yeah.
And so it's not necessarily, our farm that's been there for 80 years that's dragging down the water levels as much as it is the 30,000 acres that got developed in permanent crops and everybody on deep wells. So, I mean, and who I'm talking about
Yes.
is to the east of me. So there is no stopping it. And I don't want to, I feel like I'm getting caught in the crossfires. I'm doing everything that you guys are asking and you're driving me out of business.
And I don't mean right, like, okay, yeah, so I don't care.
Right, so have a good day.
The Jeannie's still on, so she's listening to all this also, right,
Right.
Jeannie?
Yes, I am, sir.
I think through the appeal process, we can talk about what might justify situations that are unique, that don't create cascading effects where then somebody else says, well, yeah, but I had the same situation. And we're suddenly in this, I can compare my groundwater levels came up this much in this, whatever it happens to be.
Mhm.
We have to be very cautious about not setting a precedent that undermines the entirety of what we have to try and do, and that's reduce consumptive use of groundwater. So
Yeah,
I don't know the answer, but I am saying that we got to find an answer for you.
yeah.
for
I'm not
folks that are in
asking for like a
situations.
special carve out or anything.
I get that.
I'm just, I'm doing what you guys are asking and I'm still, going down with the ship here. And so I'm obviously trying to avoid that.
And I'm wondering if there is something in the way we look at recharge credits tied to your unique situation being between the bypass and the river. And groundwater, groundwater data and river conditions and sand strata that might be underlying where your well levels are or something. Maybe there's,
See, I think there's some subterranean, geology. That just because the river's where it is, that doesn't mean that that's where the actual basin boundary is, because
careful. Now you're gonna go to a bed and banks thing and she's gonna
Well-
be illegally
I don't know, but I mean,
dumping surface water.
because no, but I mean, I think because if you go 3 miles away from us, the surface water is not salty. It's great drinking water. The subsurface, but I mean the shallow.
Right.
Shallow well water. Where Larkin and our shallow water is salty.
It's
You just
hideous.
take a drink of it. It's easy to, there's something different there. I don't know what it is,
There's a
but there's some.
geomorpholic issue.
There's something different down there. So if our water, obviously the water radiates from the river, but if it radiated a long ways that way, that drinking water closer to the red top, closer to El Nido would be salty also. Because the salt's not gonna disappear out of the water as it travels. So the water from closer to the El Nido, closer to the red top, comes from the other direction. It can't come from ours because it would be salty. That water is pretty pure. And there's something there, I don't know what it is, I don't have the knowledge to come up with what's there, but I just think there's something there that's different.
So where, give me just the approximate pumping depth range that your wells are running at, because you said you're all above Corcoran.
Yeah.
And you might have a combo. Do you guys pumping from
100 feet?
60, 100 feet?
Yeah.
Yeah.
What about out?
Like our
out-
bottom out at like 120.
What about El
140 feet.
Nido and out there, are they pumping from?
Well, they're mostly,
Fountain?
now I have a piece of ground closer to El Nido. My well, bottom of my well is 120 feet. It pumps 1,800 gallons a minute consistently. It's a good well. But my neighbors are all below the Corcoran clay. I never wanted to spend the money to go deep. I got plenty of water there.
Right.
Yeah, and I'm not affecting subsidence. I'm
Until
not-
they change this allocation policy and everybody's going back to the shallow.
Everybody was-
Yeah,
No,
right.
everybody shares that.
Again, damned if you do, damned if you
So,
don't, like, there's no way out.
Part of what I was trying to think about is there a way, the point on water quality and other things is.
But
like-
that water there is, it's shallow and it's pure, it's great drinking water. You just taste it and then you come over our way and you wouldn't drink it.
It's clogging up all my drip hoses and screwing everything up, but I love it. I'm grateful for it, but it's not the best quality water, which kind of brings me to another question. You had the sustainable management criteria. Obviously that's subsidence. Is there water quality?
There is a water quality one.
Mhm.
It's more addressing the, public
Degradation, right?
public drinking water concerns,
Okay.
like, but I think TDS is the marker.
Great.
So the GSP written by Woodard and Kern has all that more detailed analysis. I've not tried to be an expert in all the
So it'd be
elements.
in
but
But isn't it like a degradation of
It-
groundwater quality, or is it just,
It's monitoring for for like levels. So, but there was some accommodation for those levels, and
The initial level?
it could continue to get worse regardless of what you did, right? So there's an exacerbation question versus a continuation of degradation that was happening.
but I mean, ours has always been bad.
Yeah. Do,
And there were 2 or 3, I think, constituents. I don't recall, this is,
arsenic or something or whatever out there. in
it
the
might have been,
range.
but nitrate might have been in there.
Yeah.
And it really ties in with the disadvantaged community advocates for drinking water quality. And they saw a combination of things where agriculture was causing water quality concerns, and then some of the fixes and recharge potentially was gonna exacerbate the flow of poor water quality.
Because our canal is totally different. Like, the only wells I have below the Corcoran clay are drinking water wells.
Me too.
Everything else is
I know.
above, because the water quality's poor above and it's not quality drinking water, so.
Right.
I have a few.
So our situation is
Stock
kind of
water
like flipped from
housing.
everybody else,
Yeah, it's totally
basically, in
different.
the rest of the county.
situation.
Everybody else in the county is drinking shallow, domestic wells and then pumping a little
And-
bit deeper, and we're,
In our area, you need a 400-foot domestic well.
I don't know what the answer is, but
It's
there's
just different.
opportunities to try and find solutions.
well, I'm
Yeah.
here, and if you guys have any questions, and, if there's any way that like we can help navigate this or, contribute any
Right.
information,
And
It'd
to
be
date, you've been
helpful.
very helpful at sharing data and all those things, and we have to keep down this path.
yeah, but they kind of threw my data out the window.
Well, I'm trying to find why and how, and I think some of it was used, but not by Woodard and Kern and their stuff.
Yeah.
It's not to say it wasn't used by EKI and its numbers.
Okay.
So and that has to do with how they're trying to represent wells that qualify under some protocol. So there's.
And that's a little tough. I think that, I think when you actually get outside and you realize that, a lot of these wells were drilled 80 years ago or 60 years ago or whatever, it's just like, you're gonna have to work with what you got, and that's the information that we have. It's not a freshly drilled well just for samples. And so, like, there should be a little bit of accommodation for that and not just automatically reject it, because if our zone 5 or whatever is not in compliance because, we're not meeting or we're at the 215 levels and we're 40 feet higher, then obviously my data's not getting used because we're already way above the threshold. We can't be any more above the threshold. It's not gonna go any more above the threshold. I mean, that's
If
This
our
is it.
groundwater was any higher, we wouldn't build a farm.
right,
That's where we're at.
Yeah.
We're at
Yeah,
9
so-
feet.
exactly,
Right now, we've come up to 9 feet.
right.
In 2015, we were down to around 20.
Right, so it's like, and so your percentage is actually even smaller than ours. And like, maybe,
Just
Okay,
turn to
maybe-
swampland.
I got a question, maybe on
We're
this,
headed there.
on this appeal thing, right? What about what about if you have historical well data or you have, you're within a percentage? What if your particular farm unit is within a percentage of your historical well data or within the 2015 or whatever? Would that be a method to appeal?
I'm not sure, but it could be.
Okay,
Again,
because it's like,
I-
it's gonna fluctuate 10–15% or whatever. Okay, hey, I'm still within my 15% threshold. If I can hang out within this 15% threshold, then I'd like to stay within this pumping value. And then, if we go below, then you ratchet down.
So, and you guys should know me well enough by now, but a lot of this stuff I bring back is trying to create the counter argument so we can find
The solution.
solutions
Right.
and be able to have it defensible.
Yeah. Pitfall, the whole
So,
thing. I got
If
you.
if the materials you bring forward to present something, and the GSA says, okay, yeah, there's a unique situation where I grant you X,
Mhm.
and your neighbor across the street says, explain to me why you're getting special treatment. Are we allowing the GSA to be in a position that we can demonstrate that? I'm not asking you to answer that right now. That's kind of the lens I think we need to be thinking about is we can't position the GSA to be getting one-offs from everybody in some way.
Mhm.
At the same time, the GSA doesn't want to just sink one party
Just cause.
just cause, right?
Yeah.
So there's a lot of empathy for the situations and figuring out this solution. But what if you can come forward and say, you know what, this is a sound argument. I got these wells. Here's my groundwater levels are operating within a 15-foot zone over the last 40 years. And compared to out here where they've just been going down, and across the bypass, right? There's a geophysical condition there that is somewhat of a separator
There is.
versus it's just the other side of the county road, or highway,
Right.
whatever. That creates a little bit more of a differential. Yeah, that was a man-made channel,
Mhm.
it was carved, but
Makes a difference.
It
does.
does, the bypass isn't necessarily the boundary, but.
if you can find those ways that it is,
Right.
it can be held up and say, yeah, this is unique. And this is not replicating in a lot of places. So we now have a whole bunch of people making the same claims. Those possibilities exist, but I'm gonna jump to LeGrand. Like there's people in LeGrand who could probably make arguments of like, hey, I'm whatever, and I don't know what the situation would
Yeah.
be. And now you got somebody coming into the board saying, well, I'm special in LeGrand and I want a special carve out here and I want,
Would
We're all
this,
in
then wouldn't that mean that your guys' methodology is flawed?
well, no.
Well, I mean-
It means that their methodology has to be broad enough to incorporate thousands of acres. And
Hundreds of thousands.
it's unfortunate, but I think what I'm hearing from both sides is it's gonna cost you some money to find those geological things so you can point out, I'm different in this way. And that way you don't just have a string of people running to the board of the GSA saying, well, I'm like them, I'm like them, I'm like them. It's gonna force them to also find the proof in the pudding that I am different in this regard, and this is what I'm placing my stake on. And the downside is it's gonna cost you some money to do it, but I think that is what he's proposing is find your proof. And is that,
I think that's a fair way, another
So
way to
guilty
put
before
that,
innocent.
think of it if we went into an adjudication. What are you gonna have to bring? And you probably would have, you and a group of landowners would hire your own attorney. It would be different than the attorney over here at Oneida or at Red Top or whatever. And you're gonna try and arm them with the data to come out better than somebody else. Essentially by proxy is probably not the right word, without going through all the process, we're trying to get a reasonable equivalency of what an adjudication might look like without getting let's say there's a couple hundred farmers, or at least that, and we got 17 or 170,000 acres. We got TAC accounts, I think there is 1,000 unique parcel owners or somewhere on that.
Mhm.
We could have 1,000 unique zones and we could develop that. And everybody can make
I
an
would be all
argument on
for
why they be unique.
Well, I'd be all for it because then you're accountable for what's happening in your well and the only thing that you can control. I can't control what's going on in
But
LeGrand.
but the cost to
Right.
administrate
But-
that would be.
But
more
we're gonna be
expensive.
charging everybody a lot of money because to do that is going to be,
The
and
overhead
then to
on that,
monitor that is gonna be outrageous.
yeah. I mean, we think this GSA is getting expensive to do what we're doing. Imagine drilling down, from 8 zones to 1,000.
Yeah, so I have to take the burden on myself to prove that I'm,
Everybody would have to take the burden on it.
well, but I do now. So it's no different for me. You see
So-
what I'm saying? So
Yeah.
it's like, the thing that you're saying that's very unfair for everybody else, it's okay for me to do it. But it's not okay for everybody else. And so what I'm
I don't
saying
mean to
is,
imply it's okay for you and not
well,
everybody.
I know, but you know what I mean. And it's like, if 200 people came to the board and said, hey, I'm within 10% or 15, 20% of these water ranges, well, then maybe that's something to think about. Maybe if there's that many people, then the methodology that we're going by needs to be adjusted, because there's that many people that think that
They're not too far out.
they're not too far out of compliance. You see what I'm saying?
But
And
there might be another way to that, and I'm gonna come back to this again, because I think there might be a recharge path
yeah,
that minimizes all of that other ask, because if your unique sublateral recharge that occurs as a result of the geology underlying your property and your location,
yeah,
where water comes in the bypass and comes in the river.
Yeah.
And you have some sort of benefits of that recharge occurring, and we find a way to credit that to an account in a manner that's reasonable. I don't know, I'm just, again,
yeah.
Trying
I
to
mean, we
brainstorm
gotta
thoughts.
spitball ideas and.
I'm waiting for the
Just-
phone call from Jeannie on the ride home too.
Where the hell did you start?
Exactly.
Right, Jeannie?
I'm just.
Yeah. No comment.
They,
Um,
I'm gonna.
believe me, the people east of me wouldn't want my ground.
Yeah, no
We gotta
kidding.
shut down.
Yeah, they're trees.
Yeah,
would
because
die.
the room was only booked till 4, so I'm probably gonna get yelled at when I return this stuff. So
Oh,
I'm
that's
gonna,
true.
I'm gonna go ahead and
Alright.
stop the recording. Thanks, Jeannie, for coming.
Thank you for answering all my stuff.
Well,
I really appreciate it.
I'm not answering them all.
I mean-
I'm listening.
Silly
There aren't
form
any answers. to some
For
of it.
board
There
member
are
David
just-
Trevino to
You
come
know.
onto the board,
Okay, for Danielle or.
Just trying to survive.
whoever needs the
Yeah.
400
Well,
forms.
and I,
submitted.
you know,
Only
I've
for
been more
Daniel.
than once that
Alright,
I've
thank you.
All right,
mentioned,
we'll see you
there's some
tomorrow.
very creative farmers trying to do the right thing in the
Are
Madera
you going
area,
to
and your name
contact
is